Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Settle in, wherever you are tonight. Let the blanket find its proper weight over you. Let the room grow soft and dim. And let your breath slow down until it matches the low, unhurried breathing of the story about to begin. There is nothing tonight that asks anything of you. There is only a door to walk through, and a room full of scent waiting quietly on the other side of it. Tonight we do not begin with a list of plants, nor a catalogue of cures. Tonight we begin with a door, a bell, and a smell that reaches you before your eyes have even adjusted to the dimness inside. Tonight we begin with what it was like to work in the perfume room of a great apothecary shop in Florence, in the middle years of the 16th century, in the drowsy gold hour, just after the bells of Santa Maria Novella have rung for none, and the whole street outside has gone quiet with the heat of early afternoon. Imagine, if you will, that you are perhaps 16 years old, apprenticed 2 months ago to a Spezieria on a narrow street not far from the river, a shop that sells the ordinary things a Spezieria sells: dried senna and rolled bandages and small blue jars of theriac, and sells also, in a locked back room that most customers never see, something rarer: rosewater, orange flower water, pomanders shaped like small silver moons, gloves that have been steeped for a week in scented oil until the leather itself seems to breathe perfume, little pastilles of resin that release their smoke slowly over a coal. You were sent here by your family with a letter and a small trunk, the way children of your standing were sent to trades in those days. And you have spent your first 2 months sweeping, fetching water, grinding simples in the big stone mortar in the front of the shop, and wondering, with a kind of low patient longing, when you would finally be allowed through the door at the back that is always kept closed, the door with the brass ring worn smooth by 100 years of hands. Today, at last, the master calls you to it. His name, in this telling, is Maestro Cosimo, though there were 100 masters like him in 100 cities in those years, in Florence and in Venice, and in Bologna and in Milan, men enrolled in the ancient guild of doctors and apothecaries, the art di medici speciali, which in Florence numbered among its members not only the makers of medicine but, strangely to modern ears, the painters too, since paint and medicine both began, in that century, in the apothecary's careful weighing of powders and oils. Maestro Cosimo has been a member of the guild for 30 years. He has a grey beard trimmed close, ink stains on 2 fingers of his right hand from the ledger he keeps, and a way of holding very still when he is smelling something, as though the scent itself were a fragile bird that might startle and fly if he moved too quickly. He takes the brass ring in his stained fingers, turns it, and the door swings inward on a hinge that does not creak, because a hinge in this room is oiled with the same patient care as everything else in it. The smell reaches you first, before your eyes have found anything to look at. It is not one smell. It is a dozen smells folded into each other: rose and orange blossom, and something green and bitter like crushed leaves, something sweet and heavy like beeswax left too long in the sun, something faintly animal and warm underneath it, all that you cannot yet name, and will not be able to name for many weeks, until the master finally tells you what civet is and what it is for, and how small an amount of it can carry an entire room. You stand in the doorway a moment, breathing it in, and something in your chest loosens that you did not know had been held tight. The room itself is small, no larger than the pantry of a modest house. But every inch of the walls is given over to shelving, dark wood gone almost black with age and years of handling, and on the shelves stand vessels of every kind. Glass flasks with long swan necks, squat earthenware jars sealed with wax and parchment, a row of small silver spheres, each one pierced with a pattern of tiny holes, hanging on hooks like a row of quiet moons. In the corner, on a stone hearth built specially for the purpose, stands the thing that will occupy more of your attention over the coming months than any other object in the room, a copper still, its curved head like the long neck of some patient waterbird bending down to drink, a coil of tubing running from its beak into a second vessel standing in a basin of cool water. This is where the real work happens, the master says, and his voice in this room is quieter than his voice in the front of the shop, as though the room itself asks for a lower register, the way a church does, or a sick room. Everything you have learned so far, the weighing, the grinding, the reading of the ledger, all of that was only the floor beneath this room. This is the part of the trade that is not written down in full anywhere, that is passed from master to apprentice by nose and by hand, because no book can teach a nose what a nose must learn for itself. He picks up, from a shelf near the door, a small stoppered vial and holds it out to you. Smell this first, before anything else, so that you know what you are working toward. You take the vial, tilt it, breathe in. It is rosewater, though you do not yet know to call it that with any precision, only that it is the smell of a rose garden in full summer bloom, carried somehow into a bottle small enough to fit in your palm, and made, somehow, purer and more concentrated than any single flower could ever be on its own. You will spend the whole of tonight, and many nights after this one, learning exactly how that transformation happens, how a basket of damp petals becomes, through slow, careful heat and a copper vessel, and a great deal of patience, this small, clear miracle in a bottle. But that is for later. For now, the master takes the vial back gently, sets it on its shelf, and begins, in his low, unhurried voice, to tell you what this room is, and how it came to be, and what it means that you have finally been let inside it. Let us settle into that telling now together, the way you settled into it that first afternoon, with the bells of Santa Maria Novella fading into silence outside, and the smell of 100 flowers folded quietly around you. The perfume room, the master explains, did not begin as a separate art from medicine. In those years, and for a long time before them, the line between a remedy and a fragrance was thin, almost invisible in places, and a Spezieria that made good rosewater made it first because rosewater was medicine. It cooled the eyes, it settled the stomach. It was mixed into syrups for fever and dabbed onto the temples of the sick to comfort them, and only afterward, almost as an afterthought, that grew slowly into an entire second trade, did people begin to want it simply because it smelled beautiful, because it made a room feel clean and a body feel cared for, because in a world without daily bathing, as we know it now, a good scent was one of the few reliable ways a person had of feeling and being perceived as well kept. The guild records of Florence and of Venice further north along the trade roads show apothecary shops selling perfumed waters and scented gloves and pomanders alongside their medicines for well over a century by the time our story finds you standing in this small back room. some of the great religious houses had been distilling rosewater since long before that. The friars and the nuns keeping careful gardens and careful stills as part of their care for the sick who came to their doors. And much of what a lay master like Cosimo knows, he learned in turn from apprenticeships that traced back, master to master, to those quiet monastic still rooms. But by the middle of the 16th century, the trade has become its own thing, prosperous and specialized, patronized by the great families of the city, who send their household stewards to shops like this one to buy gloves and waters and sweet bags by the dozen, and who sometimes, on very particular occasions, send a lady of the house herself, veiled and attended, to choose a scent in person. He tells you, too, a little of the guild itself, the Arte dei Medici e Speziali, whose broad membership rolls, he explains with a certain wry amusement, include not only apothecaries and physicians, but the city's painters as well, since paint, in this century, is still ground and mixed by hands trained in the very same careful weighing of powders and oils that a Spezieria's own back rooms require. And more than one young man apprenticed first to a shop like this one has gone on, in later years, to grind pigments instead of simples, or the reverse, an apothecary's careful patience proving as useful to a painter's workshop as to a perfumer's. We keep our own guild hall not far from here, he tells you, where the masters gather twice yearly to settle disputes over apprenticeship terms, and to examine any journeyman who wishes, after his years of training, to be raised to the rank of master in his own right. You have a long road yet before any of that concerns you directly, child, but I tell you of it now so that you understand, from the very start, that this room you have just been let into is not merely my own private trade, kept and passed down as I alone see fit, but a small living part of something larger, older, and more carefully governed than either of us alone, a whole city's worth of shops like this one, bound together by the same rules and the same slow, careful traditions, however different each master's particular hand might be at the marble slab. You will meet one of those ladies before the year is out, the master tells you, with the faint dry humor that you will come to recognize as his particular way of being kind. And when you do, you will understand why I insist that every apprentice learn every step of this room before I let him near the front counter with a customer of consequence. A perfume that is wrong for a great lady is a perfume that ruins a shop's reputation for a decade. A perfume that is right for her is a perfume that keeps this shop fed for the same 10 years. There is very little room, in this particular corner of the trade, for carelessness. You nod, though you do not yet fully understand what carelessness might look like here, or what its opposite, the long patient rightness the master seems to hold as his standard, might require of your hands and your nose in the months ahead. He seems to read the uncertainty in your face and softens. Do not worry tonight about carelessness, he says. Tonight only smell, tonight only look. The doing comes later, a little at a time, the way it always does in this trade. Come and sit. There is a low stool near the hearth, worn smooth on its seat by however many apprentices have sat there before you, and you take it now, while the master moves about the room, taking down first one vessel and then another, naming them for you in his quiet, unhurried voice, the way a man might introduce you, one by one, to the members of a large and beloved family. This is rosewater, twice distilled, the finer of our two grades. This is orange flower water, from the bitter oranges that grow against the south wall of a garden 2 streets from here. A scent the ladies of this city have grown almost as fond of as the rose itself in these last years. This is a jar of civet paste, kept always with the lid weighted, because its smell in concentration is stronger and stranger than anything else in the room. Though diluted to almost nothing, it becomes the very thing that makes a perfume linger on the skin for hours instead of minutes. This is oil of sweet almond, our base for nearly everything we infuse. This is a lump of raw ambergris, grey and waxen and older, the master tells you, than either of you, found on a beach somewhere far to the west, and carried here by 3 separate ships and 4 separate merchants before it ever reached this shelf. By the time he has finished this slow, unhurried tour, the light through the room's one small high window has shifted from the gold of mid-afternoon toward the deeper gold of early evening, and your head is pleasantly, gently full, the way a head becomes full after a long walk through unfamiliar streets, tired in a good way, saturated in a good way. The master notices and allows himself something close to a smile. That is enough for a first evening, he says. A nose, like anything else, must be trained slowly, or it stops being useful to you. Tomorrow we will begin with the still and with the roses, because the roses will not wait for us, and everything in this room, in the end, waits on the roses. You rise from the stool. Your legs have gone a little stiff with sitting so long and so still. The master is already turning down the small lamp that has lit the room through the last hour of the telling, and as the light dims, the smell of the room seems, strangely, to grow larger, to fill the darkening space more fully than it filled the lit one, the way a sound seems louder in the dark. You step back out through the door with the worn brass ring into the ordinary front room of the shop, and the ordinary smell of dried herbs and beeswax candles that you have grown used to over your 2 months here, and it strikes you gently how much smaller that ordinary smell now seems, next to what waits behind the door you have just learned exists. Let us turn now, as you did on the second morning of your apprenticeship in this back room, to the still itself, and to the roses that give it its first and oldest work of the year. The roses, the master had told you the night before, must be gathered before the sun has fully risen, while the dew is still on them, and the heat of the day has not yet begun to draw off their scent into the open air. And so, on your second morning in the perfume trade, you find yourself walking before dawn through streets still grey and quiet, following the master and one of the older apprentices, a young man named Bernardo, who has been in this shop 4 years already, and has the calm, unhurried manner of someone who has done this particular walk 100 times before, out through a small gate in the old city wall to a walled garden kept by an arrangement between the shop and a family whose land it is. An arrangement, Bernardo tells you as you walk, that has held for longer than either of you has been alive. The garden, when you reach it, is a modest square of ground, but nearly 1/3 of it is given over to roses, rows upon rows of the deep pink damask rose that the whole perfumery trade of this city and a dozen others prizes above every other bloom, planted, trained, and pruned with the same patient specificity that a vintner gives his vines. In the grey pre-dawn light, the roses seem almost silver rather than pink, their petals still folded close against the cool of the night, and the air of the garden, even before you have bent to a single bloom, is thick and sweet in a way that makes your chest ache pleasantly. The particular ache of a scent so full it is almost, briefly, too much to hold. Quickly now, and gently, the master says, handing you a shallow woven basket. Pinch the stem, do not tear it. Take the bloom whole, do not scatter the petals here in the garden. We need every one of them where we are going. And do not linger over any single flower, too long admiring it, child. However much you might wish to, the whole garden must be in baskets, and on its way to the still before the sun has cleared that wall there, or half the morning's scent will have burned off into the sky before we have had the chance to capture a drop of it. You bend to the work. The stems are supple in the cool morning air, and the pinch and lift the master showed you becomes, within a dozen roses, a rhythm your hands settle into almost without your mind's help. Bend, pinch, lift, place, bend, pinch, lift, place, moving down the row with Bernardo a few paces ahead of you and the master somewhere behind, occasionally calling out a soft correction, gentler. Do not crush the petals against the basket's edge, or a soft word of approval. Good, just so. When your hands find the right, unhurried economy of motion on their own. The eastern sky above the garden wall goes from grey to the palest rose itself, as though the sky were only another bloom opening slowly to match the ones in your basket. And by the time the first real sunlight touches the top of the wall, the baskets are full, heaped high with damp, fragrant petals, and the three of you are already turning back toward the gate, toward the shop, toward the still that has been waiting, cold and patient, since last night for exactly this cargo. Back in the perfume room, the master sets you to work at once, because the petals, he says, will not hold their virtue for long once picked, and every hour of delay between garden and still is an hour of scent lost to the air. The copper still, that long-necked bird-shaped vessel you first saw yesterday, has a wide belly at its base, and into this belly, working quickly now, you and Bernardo pack the damp rose petals, layer upon layer, until the vessel is close to full, and then the master himself pours in water. Not so much as to drown the petals, but enough to give the heat something to carry the scent upon, and seals the lid with a paste of flour and water that will hold the vapor in and force it. Once the fire beneath begins its slow work, up through the long curved neck and down, through the coiled tube, into the cool waiting vessel below. Now, says the master, kneeling to build a small careful fire beneath the still, now we wait, and while we wait, you will learn the thing every apprentice in this room must learn before anything else, which is that fire in this room is not your servant, it is your very careful guest. Too much heat, and the vapor rises too fast, and what comes through the far end is thin and harsh and burned, smelling more of scorched stem than of rose. Too little heat, and nothing rises at all, and the whole morning's gathering sits wasted in a cold vessel while the sun climbs and the day grows warm, and every other task in the shop waits on this one. The right heat is a small heat, patient and even, the kind of heat you must tend rather than simply light and leave. And so the morning unfolds slowly around the small fire, and the softly ticking, softly hissing still, the master seated on a low stool beside it with the specific stillness he brings to everything in this room, watching the thin curl of steam rise from the still's neck, watching the first pale drops begin, After what feels to your impatient 16-year-old attention like an eternity, but is in truth perhaps half an hour, to gather and fall, one by one, into the waiting vessel below. He lets you lean close and watch this first slow gathering of drops, and there is something in the sight of it. This ordinary garden flower being drawn apart into something purer and finer than itself by nothing more than gentle heat and time, that will stay with you, the master tells you, long after you have forgotten a great many other things this room will teach you. Every apprentice remembers his first distillation, he says, watching the drops fall. Something about it settles into a person differently than the rest of the trade. I could not tell you exactly why. Perhaps because it is the moment you understand, in your body and not only in your head, that this whole room is built on patience and on trusting a process you cannot rush and can barely even see happening. Only trust that it is happening, drop by slow drop, exactly as it should. By the time the sun has climbed well above the garden wall you left at dawn, and the ordinary sounds of the street outside the shop have swelled into the full business of a working morning, cart wheels and voices and the calling of vendors, the still has yielded its first careful measure of rosewater for the year, clear as spring water, and carrying, even in that clear plainness, the whole ghost of the garden you rose before dawn to gather. The master decants it with careful hands into a clean glass flask, seals it, and sets it on the shelf beside yesterday's sample vial, the one that first taught your nose what this whole room was working toward. There, he says, and for the first time since you met him 2 months ago, there is something almost like pride in his quiet voice, though whether it is pride in the rosewater, or pride in the morning's careful work, or some small early pride in you, his newest apprentice, standing beside him with rose-scented hands and a face flushed from the still's gentle heat, you cannot yet tell and will not ask. That is the first lesson of this room, entire, in a single morning. Everything else we will learn together over the coming months is only a variation on what your own 2 hands have just done. Gather with care, heat with patience, wait longer than you think you should have to wait, and trust, always, that what comes through in the end is worth every slow hour it took to arrive. You look at the flask on the shelf, small and clear and humming faintly, even sealed, with the whole remembered garden inside it, and you understand, in a way you could not have understood, it yesterday standing uncertain in the doorway, why the master keeps this room locked, and why he lets so few people through its door, and why, now that you have finally been let through it yourself, you find you have no wish at all to leave. The rose season, you learn over the following fortnight, is not so simple as a single morning's gathering, but a whole procession of small differences that the master expects you, patiently and gradually, to begin telling apart. The deep pink damask rose gives the fullest, roundest water, the one favored above all others for medicine, and for the finer waters sold across the counter. But the walled garden holds, too, a smaller planting of the pale rose the master calls the white rose, or sometimes the apothecary's rose, whose water comes through the still lighter and cooler in character, favored by certain customers for the eyes, and for a gentler kind of household water that will not overwhelm a room the way the fuller damask sometimes can. You learn to gather the two separately, to keep their baskets apart on the walk home, to pack the still with one and scrub it thoroughly clean before ever it sees the other, since even the smallest lingering trace of one rose's oil left clinging to the copper can trouble the delicate clarity of the next day's different water. It is in this same fortnight that you make your first true mistake in the room, the kind the master has clearly been waiting for, with the calm patience of a man who has watched 100 apprentices make the very same one before you. Left briefly alone to tend a modest batch of the pale rose, while the master steps out to the front counter, you grow anxious, watching the fire burn low and add rather more kindling than the small, careful heat he taught you requires, eager, in your inexperience, to see the drops fall faster and prove your morning's work a success before he returns. The vapor rises too quickly. The first drops that fall, when he comes back and leans close to check your progress, carry a thin, scorched harshness beneath their floral sweetness that even your own untrained nose can recognize now as a fault. You brace yourself for a scolding that does not come. The master only crouches beside the still, draws the fire gently down with a practiced hand, and says, in the same unhurried voice he has used for every lesson so far, "There, now you know in your own hands what I could only ever tell you in words. A rushed fire punishes a rose, exactly the way a rushed word punishes a kindness, child. It arrives too fast and too hot and loses, in the arriving, most of what made it worth offering at all. This batch is not lost, only lessened. We will use it for the plainer household soap, rather than the fine counter water, and no harm done beyond a morning's disappointment. Tomorrow you will tend the fire more slowly, because tonight you have finally felt, in your own hands, exactly why slowness matters here. And so it proves, the following morning. Your fire smaller and steadier under his watching eye, the drops falling slow and clear and unhurried, and the small private shame of the day before dissolving, quietly, into one more patient lesson learned. Bernardo, walking home with you one evening, after a long day spent tending the roses together, tells you a little of his own first year in this room, 4 years past now, and you find, listening to him, that the room asks the same patient lessons of every apprentice who passes through its door, however different each young hand's own particular mistakes. He tells you of his own ruined first batch, scorched worse even than your pale rose had been, and of a season, his second summer here, when a whole crop of orange blossom came in too wet from an early rain and would not distill cleanly no matter how carefully the master tended the fire. A full week's gathering lost to nothing more than an untimely change in the weather. You will lose things in this room that are not your own fault at all, he tells you, as the two of you walk together through the cooling evening streets, the smell of the day's work still faint on your hands and your sleeves. The master never scolds for that kind of loss the way he might gently correct a mistake of your own hand. He only shrugs and says the garden answers to the sky before it answers to either of us, and there is no shame in a season that simply did not cooperate. You find a quiet comfort in Bernardo's telling, the comfort of learning that the particular anxious carefulness the master's high standards have begun to instill in you is not a burden unique to your own clumsy first months, but a shared, ordinary part of every apprentice's slow education in this room, one a little smoother, a little steadier, with each passing season. The way Bernardo's own hands, 4 years further along this same road than yours, have long since stopped hesitating over, even the most delicate of the room's many careful tasks. The garden itself, you come to learn across that first full season of tending it, has its own quiet calendar entirely apart from the shops. A calendar the master reads as easily as he reads the pages of his great recipe book, though nothing in the garden's calendar is written down anywhere at all. The damask roses come first, in the early warmth of late spring, followed within a fortnight or so by a second, sparser flush of the same bushes that the master calls the garden's quiet second gift. Smaller blooms and a lighter yield, but prized in their way, every bit as much as the first flush, since a water distilled from this second bloom carries a slightly different character, cooler and less heavy, that certain of the shop's older customers have come, over years of buying from this same garden, to specifically request. The orange blossom follows some weeks after the roses have finished, and behind the orange blossom, later still, come the lavender and the last of the summer's aromatic herbs, so that the whole garden, across a single turning year, offers up its harvest not all at once, but in a long unhurried procession, one gift following quietly upon the last, never so much at any single moment that the perfume room's hands cannot properly attend to it. A garden teaches patience better than any master ever could in the end. The master tells you one warm afternoon, walking the rows with you between the roses, 2 flushes, the ground beneath the bushes bare now of bloom, and waiting quietly for its second gift. I could stand here and demand 100 roses of this bush today, and it would give me exactly as many as it was ever going to give me, and not one more, however loudly or however often I demanded it. The garden does not hurry for kings, child, nor for countesses, nor even for masters of 30 years, standing in this trade. It gives what it gives, when it is ready to give it, and the whole of our work in this room, when you look at it plainly, is really only the art of receiving that gift as carefully and as fully as we can, in whatever unhurried season the garden finally chooses to offer it. You stand with him a while longer among the quiet bare bushes, saying nothing further, only watching the afternoon light settle slowly across the waiting rows, content, for this one unhurried moment, simply to let the garden's own patient silence teach you, whatever it is patiently teaching, without any need to hurry it, or yourself, toward an ending. Let us turn now to the second flower of the perfume room's year, the one that will occupy your hands through the whole of the following week, once the roses have had their turn, and the still has been scrubbed clean, and set to rest a night before its next labor. Not far from the walled garden where you gathered roses before dawn, against the sun-warmed stones of a south-facing wall, grows a small orchard of bitter orange trees. The same trees whose fruit is too sharp and too bitter for the table, but whose blossom, the master tells you, is worth more by weight than almost anything else that grows within the city walls. The trees flower later in the season than the roses, small white stars opening among the dark glossy leaves, and when they do, the whole corner of the garden fills with a scent unlike anything you smelled among the roses, sweeter in some way and stranger in another, a scent with a faint bitterness folded into its sweetness the way a good sauce holds a thread of something sharp beneath its richness. Orange flower water, the master says, standing beside you under the flowering trees on the morning of the gathering, has only lately become as prized in this city as the rose has always been. When I was your age, an apprentice, few households outside the very grandest asked for it by name. Now half my custom asks for nothing else, and I confess I understand why. There is something in this scent that feels newer, brighter, less like an old remedy and more like a small daily luxury. The great ladies wear it on their linen. The barbers scent their basins with it. Even the water sellers in the market have begun, in the last few years, to claim their water is perfumed with it. Though between us, child, most of what they sell has never been within a mile of an orange tree. The gathering itself follows much the pattern the roses taught you, though the blossoms are smaller and more delicate in the hand, requiring an even gentler pinch and lift than the rose stems did, and you find, working beside Bernardo under the fragrant canopy, that your fingers have already begun to learn a kind of memory for this work, a lightness they did not have 2 weeks ago when you first bent to a rose. The baskets fill more slowly than the rose baskets did, since a single orange blossom weighs so little and gives up its petals so reluctantly compared to the generous open bloom of a damask rose. And by the time the sun has cleared the wall and the master calls the gathering finished, your basket holds barely half what a morning's rose gathering yielded, though the scent rising from it, warm now with the growing heat of the morning, seems, if anything, even more concentrated than the roses had been. Back in the perfume room, the distillation follows the same slow, patient rhythm as before, the still packed with blossoms, the small, careful fire tended beneath it, the long wait while the first thin curl of vapor rises and begins, drop by unhurried drop, its journey down the coiled tube into the waiting vessel. But there is a difference this time that the master points out to you as you watch, a difference that will matter, he says, for every distillation you undertake in this room from now on. Watch the water that rises above the oil in the receiving vessel, he says, nodding toward the pale liquid slowly gathering below the still's beak. With the rose, we distill for the water alone, and the water is the whole of our prize. But orange blossom gives us something more, if we are patient and skilled enough to catch it. Look there on the surface. You look, and after some time, a thin film begins to appear on the surface of the gathered water, catching the light with a faint golden sheen. So slight you might miss it entirely if you were not looking for it exactly as the master has taught you to look. That, he says, is the oil, a few precious drops floating above the water, worth many times the water's own worth, ounce for ounce. Skimming it takes a steady hand and more patience than most apprentices believe they possess until they are asked to prove it. We will practice on tomorrow's batch, when there is more of it to work with and less harm done if your hand is not yet steady enough. That night, walking home through streets grown cool and quiet, you carry with you a small unstoppered thought that will return to you many times over the coming months, that this whole trade, root to flower to bottle, is a trade of patience rewarded, of small precious things extracted slowly and carefully from ordinary abundant things, roses that grow by the 100 in a garden, blossoms that fall by the 100 from a tree, transformed through nothing more dramatic than heat and time, and a steady watchful hand, into something rare enough to be weighed against silver. The following season teaches you a further, gentler lesson about the orange trees, one the master seems almost to have been saving for a quieter afternoon. Not every part of the tree, he shows you, goes to waste once the blossom has fallen and the small green fruit has begun to swell in its place, for the bitter peel itself, dried carefully in thin curling strips on a rack near the room's one small window, becomes, ground fine, a warming addition to certain of the resin pastilles, and the leaves themselves, crushed and steeped briefly in hot water, yield a sharper, greener cousin to the blossom's own sweetness, favored by a small number of customers who find the flower water alone too delicate for their taste and want something with a little more bite folded beneath it. Nothing in this room is ever entirely wasted, if you are patient enough to find its second use. The master tells you, showing you how to strip and dry the peel without bruising it. Though I confess it took me the better part of my own apprenticeship to learn even half of the second, uses my own master knew by heart. You will go on finding them yourself, long after I have stopped teaching you anything new, and that, I think, is exactly as it should be. Some months later, when a second pomander commission arrives, this time from a young scholar recently returned from his studies abroad and eager, he tells the master frankly, to smell as fashionable as his newly finished education, you are given, for the first time, the chance to propose a blend of your own rather than simply follow the master's lead, and you find yourself reaching, almost without deciding to, for that same dried orange peel you learned to strip and cure weeks before, folding a careful pinch of it into the ordinary rose and ambergris base to lend the whole blend a brighter, more citrus-edged warmth than the master's own usual recipes carry. He watches you work without interrupting, and when you hold the finished paste out for his judgment, he takes his time over it, breathing it in slowly, the way he has taught you to breathe in everything in this room, and tells you, at last, that it is good, genuinely good, a small original variation he had not himself thought to try in exactly this combination, and that the young scholar, when he collects it 2 days later, agrees, declaring it the freshest, most modern scent he has smelled in any shop in the city. There, the master says, once the scholar has gone, pleased and paying handsomely for the privilege, is the true sign that an apprentice is beginning to become a perfumer in his own right, rather than merely a careful copier of another man's recipes. You did not follow anything I taught you today, not exactly. You took what I taught you and asked it a new question, and it answered you honestly. That is the whole of what this trade can ever hope to give a person in the end, once the earliest lessons are behind them. Emboldened a little by this small early success, you find yourself, in the weeks that follow, turning the same quiet questioning attention toward other corners of the room's established recipes, wondering, as you tend the pomander paste one evening, whether a touch of the dried orange peel might lend a similar brightness there too, or whether the sun-steeped rosemary oil, so useful in the household waters, might find some further use folded into a resin pastille meant for a livelier household than the solemn ones the master usually supplies. He listens to each small proposal with patient seriousness, neither dismissing your curiosity nor indulging it uncritically, testing some of your suggestions alongside you at the marble slab and gently explaining, when a particular combination fails to please either of your noses, exactly why it falls short of the standard this room holds itself to. not every experiment succeeds. A rosemary pastille, you both agree after a single trial, proves too sharp and too medicinal for comfortable burning, better suited to a sick room's brisk clearing of stale air than to any household's evening comfort. But the exercise itself, win or lose, teaches you something the master's own established recipes alone could never quite manage to teach. The particular confidence of trusting your own trained nose enough to test it against the unknown, and the equally important humility of accepting, calmly and without wounded pride, when that same trained nose has led you somewhere the room's established wisdom, tried and proven across generations, still knows better. Let us turn now, as the season turns in the story, from the growing things of the garden toward the smaller, stranger, more enduring treasures kept on the highest shelves of the perfume room. The things that do not wilt with a season's end, because they were never, in the way a rose or a blossom is, alive to begin with. Among the objects that first caught your eye on that first evening in the room, hanging in their quiet row of small silver spheres, are the pomanders, and it is to these that the master turns your attention next. On an afternoon when the rains have come, and no gathering in any garden is possible, and the whole shop has settled into the slower indoor rhythm that rainy afternoons in this trade always bring. A pomander, the master says, taking one of the pierced silver globes down from its hook and turning it in his fingers so the light catches the fine patterns of holes worked into its surface, is nothing more than a small case built to carry a great scent close against the body, worn at the belt or on a chain about the neck, or, for those grand enough to afford several, carried from room to room in the hand like a small private garden a person keeps always with them. The name itself comes from the old word for an amber apple, pomum ambre, because the oldest pomanders of all were nothing more than a lump of scented paste rolled into the rough shape of a small apple and carried loose in a pocket or a purse. What we make now, in cases like this one, is finer, but the purpose has not changed in all the years since. A pomander exists to answer a single simple need. The world outside this shop, child, does not always smell as sweet as this room does. He is not being unkind, only plain, in the way he is often plain with you about the ordinary conditions of the century you are both living in, the narrow streets, the open gutters, the crowded rooms, the long months when bathing is neither easy nor especially encouraged by anyone's notion of good health. A pomander worn at the belt, filled with a paste of ambergris and civet and musk bound together with gum and warmed spices, gives its bearer a private cloud of good scent to breathe through in a crowded street or a close-packed church, and gives, besides, a quiet advertisement of standing, since only those with money to spare could afford the rarer ingredients such a paste demanded. The making of the paste itself is a slower, more deliberate craft than anything the still has yet taught you, requiring no fire at all, only patient hands and careful measure. The master lays out before you, on a clean marble slab, small portions of each ingredient in turn, a grain of true musk no larger than a lentil, a shaving of grey ambergris, a scrape of civet paste taken, with a small ivory spoon from its weighted jar, gum benzoin softened in a little rosewater to bind the whole, and a pinch each of ground cloves, and cinnamon and orris root for warmth and body. Each of these, he says, is worth more, weight for weight, than gold, some of them worth a great deal more, and each of them, alone in the raw state you see it here, would strike you as unpleasant, even alarming, if I asked you to smell it without the others. Civet alone is a heavy animal smell that most noses recoil from at first meeting. Musk alone can be almost overwhelming in a small closed room. It is only together, in the right small measure, blended with the sweetness of the resins and the warmth of the spices, that these strange raw things become the thing we call perfume. This is the whole secret of this room, if a room like this can be said to hold a single secret. Nothing beautiful here is beautiful entirely on its own. Everything is a marriage of parts, and the skill of the perfumer lies almost entirely in knowing the measure of that marriage. You watch his hands work the paste, kneading the softened resin into the fragrant grains and shavings with a patience that seems, by now, less like a technique he is demonstrating and more like something close to prayer, a slow, attentive rolling and folding that continues long after the paste has, to your eye, seemed ready, until the master finally judges it done by some sense you do not yet share, and packs it, with a small ivory tool, into the waiting pierced case. There, he says, sealing the little globe and holding it out for you to smell, and when you lean close to the tiny pierced holes, the scent that reaches you is nothing like the sum of its parts laid out separately on the marble slab. It is warm and round and complex, sweet with a low animal undertone that gives it, somehow, more life than a purely floral scent could have carried, a scent that seems, even in this small quantity, to fill the whole rainy afternoon of the shop around you. This one, the master says, setting it carefully into a lined box lined with soft wool, is bound for the household of a magistrate 3 streets from here, who orders 1 new pomander each winter, and wears the last year's until the scent has faded entirely from the paste inside. Wealthy men wear their perfume the way poor men wear their patched clothing, child, mended and mended again until it can serve no longer. There is no shame in that. There is only the ordinary economy of a costly thing. The rain continues outside the shop's one small window through the rest of that afternoon, and you spend the remaining hours of it practicing the same slow rolling and folding motion on a smaller batch of paste the master sets before you. Your first attempt clumsy and uneven, your second better, your third, by the time the light has begun to fail and the shop's ordinary evening tasks call you back to the front room, beginning, faintly, to hold together in your fingers the way the master's own paste held together beneath his. He inspects it without much comment, which you have already learned, in your short time in this room, is itself a kind of quiet approval, and sets it aside to finish curing on its own, and sends you home through the rain with the strange animal warm sweetness of civet and musk still clinging faintly to your fingers, a scent you find, oddly, that you do not mind carrying with you at all. Not every pomander commission, you learn in the weeks that follow, is so straightforward as the magistrate's yearly order. A merchant's widow comes to the shop one grey morning, asking for a pomander to be made for her late husband's memory, worn, she explains quietly, at her belt through the coming year of mourning, and asks the master to build it without civet or musk at all, since she finds she cannot bear, in her present grief, the warmth those 2 ingredients usually lend a blend, and wants instead something plainer, cooler, closer in spirit to the resins that burn in church during a requiem than to the rich sweetness the master's ordinary pomanders carry. The master listens to her request without any visible surprise and sets about, once she has gone, teaching you a second recipe you had not yet seen. A morning pomander built instead around frankincense and a little dried rosemary for remembrance, bound with the same gum benzoin, but warmed with only the faintest trace of clove, cooler and more solemn than anything you have yet made at the marble slab. A perfumer who knows only how to please a happy customer. He tells you, working the paler paste between his fingers with the same unhurried care he brings to every blend, has learned only half his trade. Grief asks for scent too, child, though it asks for a very different kind, and a good perfumer learns to hear which kind a person needs before he ever reaches for his usual jars. You make the widow's pomander together that same afternoon, and when she returns some days later to collect it, and lifts it to her face and breathes it in, slowly, the way the master has taught every customer in this room, without quite meaning to breathe, she says nothing at all, only nods once, and pays and leaves, and the master watches her go with a quiet, grave attention that stays with you long after the shop's ordinary business has resumed around you both. Let us turn now to a corner of the perfume rooms, work that surprised you more than any other, when the master first explained it, because it did not begin, as the rosewater and the pomanders had, with a plant or a resin, but with leather. The trade in scented gloves, the master tells you one morning as he lays out on the marble slab a pair of pale kid gloves, soft and supple, and to your eye entirely plain, entirely without ornament, has grown so large in these last decades that certain shops in the city deal in nothing else, buying their leather already cut and stitched from the glover's own guild, and doing only the scenting themselves. Though a Spezieria like this one does both trades under one roof, since the herbs and oils used to perfume a glove are the very same herbs and oils used in every other corner of this room. A glove, he says, turning the pale leather in his hands, takes scent more readily than almost anything else we work with, and holds it longer because leather itself, worked and softened as it is, has a kind of hunger for oil that cloth and paper never developed. Give a good glove a week steeped properly in scented oil, and it will carry that scent, faintly but unmistakably, for a year or more of ordinary wearing. This is no small thing, in a city where a person's hands are often the only part of them that a stranger, meeting them in the street or across a shop counter, has the chance to come close enough to notice. The scenting itself, you learn over the following days, is a slower business even than the pomander's paste had been, requiring not an afternoon, but the better part of a week. The gloves first softened with a light oil of sweet almond worked patiently into every seam, and fold with a soft cloth, then laid, still faintly damp with that first oil, into a shallow chest lined with cedar. Between layers of linen, soaked in whatever scent has been ordered, orange flower for a lighter, younger hand, rose for the more traditional custom, and for the grandest orders, a blend the master keeps as something close to a private recipe, built around ambergris and a whisper of civet worked so finely into the base oil that it never announces itself as an animal scent at all, only lends the floral notes above it a warmth and a lasting power they would not have carried alone. The finest gloves in this city, the master says, closing the lid of the cedar chest over today's pair and setting a weight upon it to press the scent evenly into the leather, come not from Florence at all, in the opinion of most of my customers, but from certain workshops in Spain, whose leather is worked finer than ours and whose perfumers, they say, guard a family recipe for their scenting oil that no rival has ever managed to copy exactly. We do not have that particular recipe, and I will not pretend to you that what we make here rivals it precisely, but we make gloves fine enough that the household of more than one noble family in this city sends to us rather than paying the greater cost and the greater weight of ordering from across the sea. That, child, is its own kind of achievement, and one I would ask you to take some quiet pride in, now that your own hands have begun to do a small part of the work. You spend the rest of that week learning the careful rhythm of the gloved chest, laying and turning and relaying the linen between the softening leathers, checking each day's progress by lifting a glove to your face and drawing a slow, careful breath, the way the master has taught you to test any scent in this room. Not a quick sniff, but a long, unhurried inhalation that gives the fragrance time to unfold in stages. The first note, and then, a moment later, the second note beneath it, and then, if you are patient enough and the scent is well made, a third note beneath even that, low and lasting, the note that will still be there faintly on the leather a year from now, long after the first bright top note has faded from 100 wearings. By the end of the week, the finished gloves, pale and supple, and now carrying, in their every seam, the folded ghost of rose and orange blossom, and something warmer and stranger beneath, are wrapped in soft paper and laid in a lined box for delivery to the household that ordered them. And the master allows you, before the box is closed, one last long unhurried breath of the finished work. And you find, standing there with the box open before you, and the whole week's patient labor rising faintly from the leather, that you understand now, in your hands as much as in your head, exactly what he meant that first evening about a nose being trained slowly, layer upon patient layer, the way these very gloves have been. Let us turn now to the oils themselves, the quiet, unglamorous workhorses of the whole perfume room, without which, the master reminds you often, none of the room's finer work would be possible at all. Not every scent in this room begins with the fire and vapor of the still. Many begin instead with nothing more than a jar, a measure of good oil, sweet almond most often, though sometimes olive for the coarser household work, and a generous quantity of whatever petal or leaf or seed the master intends to draw its virtue into that oil. This is the art of maceration, a slower and gentler cousin of distillation, requiring no fire at all, only sunlight, patience, and the same watchful turning and tending that every other process in this room has already taught your hands to understand. Lavender. The master says one bright morning, handing you a wide, shallow jar already half filled with pale oil, grows in modest quantity in a corner of our own garden, and though it will never rival the rose or the orange blossom in this city's affection, it earns its place in this room a dozen times over for the sheer usefulness of what it gives us. Pack the jar full, child, gently. Do not bruise the flowers more than picking already has, and seal it, and we will set it on the sill through the coming weeks, where the sun can do the slow work that fire does for the still, only more gently and over a much longer patience. You pack the jar as instructed, layer upon layer of the small purple spikes pressed gently down into the pale oil until the jar can hold no more, and seal it with a stretched piece of bladder tied tight with cord, and carry it out to the sill of the room's one small high window, where a whole row of similar jars already stands in various stages of their slow transformation, some pale and barely scented still, others further along in their weeks of sun steeping, gone a deep amber, richly perfumed even through the glass. Every few days, the master instructs, we bring each jar in, strain out the spent flowers, and pack it fresh, and return it to the sill, and do this again and again, sometimes 6 or 7 times over, each fresh batch of flowers giving up a little more of their oil into the same base, until the oil itself has grown so saturated with scent that it can hold no more. This is not quick work. It is not meant to be. But an oil built this way, 6 or 7 slow infusions deep, holds a richness that no single quick steeping could ever match. And it is this richness, more than anything else, that separates the perfumer's oil from the ordinary scented oil any household might make for itself in its own kitchen. Over the coming weeks you learn to tend this whole quiet row of sun-steeped jars alongside your other duties, lavender and rosemary and a fragrant local mint the master favors for certain household waters, each jar demanding its own particular rhythm of straining and repacking, and you come to feel, tending them, something close to what a gardener must feel tending a row of slow-ripening fruit, a patience that has nothing to do with waiting idly and everything to do with steady attentive care, given a little at a time, day after day, until the thing being cared for is finally, quietly, ready. The oils that result, decanted at last into smaller vessels for sale or for further work elsewhere in the room, become the base for half of everything else the perfume room produces. The softening oil for the gloves, the binding agent for certain pastes, the last quiet ingredient stirred into a finished water to give it, on the skin, a lasting softness that water alone could never provide. It is unglamorous work, the master tells you more than once, watching you strain another spent batch of lavender from another jar of deepening amber oil. But it is the work that holds the whole room together, and a good perfumer, he says, is built as much from patience with unglamorous work as from any finer gift of the nose. One warm afternoon, while you are turning the row of jars on the sill, a customer arrives at the front counter, asking specifically for the glove trade the master keeps, and you are called out from the back room to watch, since the master believes, he tells you afterward, that an apprentice learns as much from a single well-handled sale as from a week of quiet practice alone at the marble slab. The customer is a household steward, sent by his mistress to collect a pair of gloves, ordered a fortnight before, and he examines the finished pair with the careful, faintly suspicious attention of a man who has been burned once before. He explains, by a shop further along the street that sold his mistress a pair scented so heavily with civet that she could not bear to wear them past a single evening. That is the whole art of it. The master says to you afterward, once the steward has gone away satisfied, the gloves wrapped carefully in their paper. Any apprentice can learn to lay a scent into a leather. It takes real years to learn how much scent a particular leather, for a particular customer, in a particular season, ought properly to carry. Too little, and the customer wonders why she paid the extra price at all. too much, and she cannot bear to wear the gloves past a single evening, and tells her friends, and her friends tell their households, and a shop's whole reputation in this narrow trade can turn on exactly that small, careful judgment, made fresh with every single pair. He tells you too, on a quieter evening not long after, of the particular fame that Florentine scented leather has lately won beyond the borders of this city, and this country entirely, carried north across the mountains by merchants and by marriages both, the household of a Florentine lady who became, some years past, the wife of a French king, bringing with her not only her own tastes, but her own city's perfumers, so that the fashion for scented gloves that has flourished here for generations has lately begun, by every account reaching this shop, to flourish in Paris too, worked now by hands trained originally in workshops not unlike this very one. It pleases me to think of it, the master says, setting a fresh pair of gloves into their cedar chest to begin their week of scenting. That something made in a room this small, by hands as ordinary as yours and mine, might travel so very far, and be worn, perhaps, by ladies who have never once heard the name of this street, nor ever will. There is a second kind of leather work, quieter than the fine gloves, and rarer in this shop's ordinary custom, that the master shows you only once, on an autumn afternoon when a bookbinder from 2 streets over sends across a small stack of blank leather-bound ledgers, asking whether the perfume room might scent their covers before the pages inside are ever written upon, a fashion, the master explains, favored by a small number of scholarly households who like to open a private journal or a book of accounts and meet, each time, the same faint calming fragrance rather than the plain smell of tanned hide. He lets you work this particular order almost entirely on your own, a light hand of orris root and a whisper of the sun-steeped lavender oil worked into the covers over several careful days. And when the finished ledgers are collected, the bookbinder himself leans close to smell one before he pays, and tells the master, with evident surprise, that he has never in his years of trade encountered a scent applied so evenly across a whole cover, without a single patch smelling stronger than the rest. That, the master tells you afterward, with the same quiet satisfaction you are coming to recognize as his highest praise, is a compliment worth far more to me than the coin itself. An uneven hand shows itself first in exactly that kind of work, child, where there is no petal or leather grain to hide behind, only the plain surface and your own steadiness or unsteadiness laid bare across the whole of it. You did not embarrass this shop today. I want you to know that plainly, since I do not always say such things aloud as often as I ought. You carry the bookbinder's quiet compliment and the master's own rarer one beside it, home with you that evening, turning them over with a private pleasure you do not fully share even with your own family, since the whole particular satisfaction of this trade, you are beginning to understand, is not the kind of thing easily explained to someone who has never stood at this marble slab themselves, working a scent by feel and by patience into something as plain and unglamorous on its surface as a leather-bound book. The oils, too, once you have grown practiced enough in their tending, teach you a further lesson about patience the master had not fully explained on that first bright morning at the window-sill. Not every infusion answers well to the sun's gentle heat. He shows you one grey week, when the autumn clouds settle thick over the city for the better part of a fortnight, and the jars on the sill, deprived of their usual warmth, must instead be carried each evening to a spot near the kitchen hearth, warmed more gently still by the banked coals through the night, and returned each morning to their proper place on the sill, in case the sun should reappear. An oil will forgive you a slower infusion far more readily than it will forgive you a rushed or an overheated one, he tells you, checking the jars by their gentler hearthside warmth. Better a full season of patient sun and patient coal, both, than a single week of impatient forcing near an open flame, which scorches the oil's own base as surely as a rushed fire scorches a rose. You learn, tending the jars through that long grey fortnight, a slower and steadier patience, even than the sunlit windowsill had first taught you. The patience of tending something faithfully through a season that refuses to cooperate, rather than only through the easy bright mornings when the sun does all the difficult work for you. There comes, too, in that same grey fortnight, a lesson in the oils that has nothing to do with weather at all, when a jar you packed some weeks before with a rarer herb, a fragrant local sage the master favors for a particular household remedy, is found, on inspection, to have soured rather than sweetened with its long steeping. A faint, unpleasant edge under its expected fragrance that tells the master, before he has even finished lifting the stopper, that something in the packing went wrong. He does not scold you for it, though the jar was, in fact, one of your own early attempts at the windowsill work, made in your first careless weeks with the oils, before your hands had learned the proper judgment of how tightly to pack the fresh herb, and how thoroughly to dry it before ever it touched the oil. A little moisture left clinging to the leaf, packed too eagerly into the jar, he says, turning the soured oil in the light to show you the faint cloudiness that has crept into what should have been a clear, deep amber. It happens to every apprentice at least once, and it happened to me more than once besides, in my own first year at this same sill. The lesson is a simple one, though it took my own hands longer to learn than I like to admit. Dry the herb fully, patiently, before you ever pack it into the oil. However tempting it may be to rush a fragrant harvest straight from the garden into the jar, a little patience at the very start of a thing saves a great deal of waste at its end. You pour the sod batch away, not without a small private pang at the loss of your own early careful work, and begin again the following week with a fresh harvest, dried this time exactly as he has shown you, and when the new batch comes through clear and sweet some weeks later, the quiet satisfaction of having corrected your own earlier fault settles into you more deeply, somehow, than if the first batch had simply succeeded without ever teaching you anything at all. There is a particular hour of the week, once the gloves and the oils have both settled into your ordinary rhythm, that you find yourself coming quietly to treasure above almost any other in the whole shop's unhurried schedule, the late afternoon, when the master allows a short pause in the day's labor for what he calls, half in jest, the room's own accounting, a slow, unhurried walk together along every shelf, checking each vessel in turn, noting which oils are nearing readiness, which gloves want turning in their cedar chests, which pomanders have sold, and which remain waiting for a buyer. It is not, on its surface, glamorous work, no different in its bones from any careful tradesman's ordinary stock-taking. And yet the master conducts it always With the same unhurried reverence, he brings to the rarest distillation, lifting each jar in turn, holding it briefly to the light, sometimes lifting it to his nose for a single confirming breath before setting it back in its place. A shelf checked carelessly, he tells you during one such quiet accounting, becomes, over a season or two, a shelf that no longer tells its keeper the truth. An oil left too long past its proper turning grows rancid without anyone noticing until a customer's nose catches the fault before your own does. And there is no worse embarrassment in this trade, child, than a customer discovering a spoiled good before the shop itself has discovered it. This slow walk we take together, once a week, every week, without fail, is how I have kept this room honest with itself for 30 years running. It asks very little of either of us, and it protects a very great deal. You come, over the following months, to look forward to this particular hour more than you might have expected when you were first shown it, a quiet, unhurried communion with the whole of the room's accumulated work. Each vessel a small chapter in a story the two of you are writing together, one careful week at a time. Let us turn now to a smaller, harder object that sits in a wooden bowl near the front edge of the marble slab, one you noticed on your very first evening in this room, without quite understanding what it was. A pale round thing the size of an egg, faintly ridged where it has been shaped and turned by hand. A washing bowl, the master says, taking one from the bowl and turning it in his fingers, so you can see the fine pale grain of it, though the grand households prefer to call it a soap, borrowing the word from further north, where such things are made in greater quantity and cruder form than we trouble ourselves with here. Ours are finer, ours are worth the extra labor they demand. The making of a washing bowl, you learn, begins not in this room at all, but in a small stone yard behind the shop, where a slow, patient, faintly acrid business unfolds over the course of several days. Wood ash and lime worked with water into a caustic liquor strong enough to sting the unprotected skin, and then this liquor boiled down, slowly and with great care, with rendered fat and oil, until the whole mass thickens and turns, as if by some small ordinary miracle, from a harsh grey liquid into a soft pale paste that no longer stings at all. This part of the work, the master admits, is not glamorous, and he does most of it himself with the help of Bernardo, keeping you at a careful distance from the boiling liquor, until your judgment, he says, has grown steady enough to be trusted near it. But the part that belongs properly to this room, he says, the part that turns an ordinary washing bowl, of the kind any household might make crudely for itself, into the kind the great families of this city send their stewards specially to buy from us, is what happens after the boiling. Come, and I will show you. He leads you to a wide, shallow trove where the pale, soft soap paste, cooled now from its boiling, sits waiting and begins working into it with strong, patient hands. A measure of ground orris root, the same pale, fragrant root, the master reminds you, that lends its warmth to half the pomanders and pastilles in this room, along with a scattering of dried rose petals crushed almost to powder, and a few careful drops of the sweet almond oil you have spent the last weeks learning to infuse on the windowsill. Orris root, he explains as he works, carries a scent that is soft and a little like violets, though gentler, and it has besides a particular gift, one that took the trade a very long time to discover and prize properly. which is that it holds its scent inside a soap far longer than any flower alone ever could. A soap scented with rose petals alone will smell faintly of roses the day it is made and smell of very little at all a month later, once it has begun to dry and harden with use. A soap scented with orris root beneath the rose will carry both scents together for the whole of its life. Drying only makes the orris note rise a little more, never fades it away. He works the fragrant paste with the same unhurried thoroughness he brings to every task in this room, kneading and folding until the whole mass is evenly perfumed throughout, rather than scented only at its surface, and then divides it, with a practiced eye, into portions of roughly equal size, which he hands to you to roll between your two palms into the smooth, firm ovals you have seen sitting finished in their bowl since your very first evening here. Your first attempts, unsurprisingly by now, come out lopsided, one end thicker than the other. The surface marked with the small creases of hands, still learning the proper pressure to apply. The master examines them without unkindness, sets two aside as good enough to sell, and shows you again, more slowly, the particular rolling motion, less a squeeze than a steady rotating pressure. That produces the smooth, even ovals the finer trade demands. By your 10th attempt, your hands have begun, as they did with the pomander paste weeks before, to find the rhythm on their own, and the ball that finally sits finished in your palm, smooth and pale and faintly rose-scented, earns from the master something close to real approval, a slow nod and a murmured, "That one, yes, that one is fit to sell." These, he tells you, setting the finished balls out on a clean cloth to cure and harden over the coming days, travel further than almost anything else this room makes. Merchants carry them by the crate to cities that have no perfumers of their own to rival ours. And I am told, though I have never seen it with my own eyes, that a soap made in this city, scented in a room not so very different from this one, sometimes makes its way as far as the courts of France, where I understand our whole Florentine trade in scent, gloves and soaps and waters alike, has lately found particular favor, thanks in no small part to the household of a certain Florentine lady, who married into that country's royal family some years ago now, and brought her own city's perfumers, and her own city's tastes along with her. There is one further small custom belonging to the washing bowls, that the master teaches you only near the close of that first year, a custom he explains almost apologetically, as though slightly embarrassed to admit the shop indulges in it at all. Certain of the finest balls, the ones rolled by his own most careful hands rather than by a still-learning apprentice, are pressed, before they fully cure, with a small carved wooden stamp bearing the shop's own mark, a simple rose worked in outline, so faint an impression that it fades within the ball's first week of ordinary use, but visible, for that first week at least, to any household proud enough to display its washing bowl rather than keep it hidden away in a plain dish. Vanity, perhaps, the master admits, showing you the small stamp where it hangs on its own peg near the marble slab, though I prefer to call it a mark of pride in work well made, the same pride a painter signs into the corner of his canvas, or a goldsmith stamps into the base of his finest cup. We do not stamp every ball that leaves this shop, only the ones I am willing to put my own name behind without reservation. He lets you press the mark yourself that same afternoon into a small batch of your own rolling. And though your hand is not yet quite steady enough to leave an impression as crisp as his own, he allows the attempt to stand uncorrected in the finished dish, the first small mark of your own work the shop has ever sent out into the wider city, bearing, faintly, your own beginning skill alongside his established mastery. Once each year, in the coldest week before the turning of the calendar, the wider guild of this city holds a modest winter fair in the square before the cathedral, a gathering of the finer trades set up under canvas awnings against the cold. Where a Spezieria like this one is permitted a small table alongside the goldsmiths and the fine cloth merchants and the bookbinders, and the master, who otherwise keeps almost entirely to his own quiet shop through the ordinary run of the year, closes the perfume room for 2 full days, each winter to stand at this table himself, with you beside him, offering the finest of the year's work to whichever household happens to pass. It is, you discover, that first cold morning under the awning, an entirely different rhythm of trade than the shop's own patient counter, quicker, louder, full of strangers pausing only a moment before moving on to the next table. And you find yourself, in your very first hour there, uncertain how to speak of the room's careful work in the short breath a passing customer allows you. The master, watching you struggle a little with this new rhythm, leans close during a quiet stretch of the morning and offers you a small piece of counsel. He says he was given himself at just such a fair many winters ago. You cannot tell the whole story of this room to a stranger passing at a market table. Child, not in the few breaths they will spare you. Do not try. Offer them only the scent itself, held out on your open palm or your wrist, and let the scent tell whatever part of the story it is able to tell on its own, in its own silent language. If it speaks to them, they will stay and ask their own questions, and then you may tell them as much of the rest as they wish to hear. If it does not speak to them, no amount of your own eager telling will make them stay a moment longer than the scent itself earns. You take this counsel to heart for the remainder of the 2 cold days, offering your open palm rather than your eager words, and find, by the fair's second afternoon, that your own quiet confidence in the room's own work, offered plainly and without hurry, draws more lingering customers to your side of the table than your first morning's nervous explanations ever managed. The fair closes each year with the cathedral bells ringing the whole square into a hush for evening prayers, awnings folded, tables cleared. The master's modest earnings from 2 days' trade counted carefully into a small leather purse before the walk home through streets grown sharply cold with the full arrival of true winter. A fair like this one will never rival a single fine commission from a household like the Countess's. He tells you, as the 2 of you walk home together that first winter, the folded awning canvas heavy across his shoulder. But it does something a private commission cannot, which is remind this whole city, once a year, plainly and publicly, that this small quiet shop exists at all, tucked away on its narrow street, waiting patiently the other 360-some days of the year for whichever household finally troubles itself to seek it out. Let us turn now, as the last of the soap balls cure on their cloth, and the light through the small high window begins its slow afternoon decline, to a quieter, more domestic corner of this room's work, one that touches. The master tells you nearly every household in the city in some small way, whether that household can afford rosewater and pomanders or not. The sweet bag, small and simple as it looks, sitting no larger than the palm of your hand, and stitched from whatever modest scrap of linen or silk a household has to spare, is filled, the master explains, laying out before you a small heap of dried lavender flowers, a handful of whole cloves, a curl of dried orange peel, and a pinch of powdered orris root, with a mixture not so very different in its bones from the scented paste of a pomander, though built from humbler, more affordable ingredients, and meant not to be worn on the body, but tucked instead among a household's folded linens, in the deep chest where sheets and shirts and undergarments are stored between washings. A great house, the master says, measuring the dried lavender into a small linen square with a practiced hand, keeps its linen chest lined with cedar and its sweet bags renewed each season, so that every sheet and every shirt carries, always, a faint clean fragrance rather than the close, stale smell that linen left too long in a closed chest inevitably develops. It is a small thing, child, but small things, repeated across every household in a city, add up over a generation into something that shapes how an entire people come to think a well-kept home ought to smell. This is as much a part of our trade as the grandest pomander we ever sell to a magistrate. Perhaps more a part of it, since we sell 100 sweet bags for every pomander, and 100 small quiet satisfactions matter, in the sum of a shop's year, every bit as much as one grand one. He shows you the simple stitching that closes a sweet bag, once filled, a quick running seam any hand can manage after a little practice, and sets you to filling and stitching a dozen of them yourself, while he turns his attention to other work at the far end of the marble slab. The rhythm of it is gentler and quicker than anything the room has taught you so far. Measure, fold, fill, stitch, tie, and by the 6th or 7th bag your hands have found their pace, and you find yourself, without quite meaning to, humming very softly under your breath, the way a person hums at any small pleasant task that no longer demands their full worried attention. There is a further use for these, the master adds, glancing over at your growing pile of finished bags, that you should know, since it touches on something larger than linen chests. Bags very like these, packed a little more heavily and hung rather than tucked away, are what a careful household turns to in the warmer months, when the air of the city grows close and heavy, and certain illnesses seem, to those of us in this trade at least, to travel more freely on air that smells of decay and crowding than on air kept sweet and clean. Whether the scent itself does the protecting, or only comforts the mind of the person breathing it, I could not swear to you with certainty, child, and better trained physicians than I have argued the question for longer than either of us has been alive. But I will tell you this. In the years of my own apprenticeship, when a bad summer came to this city, and the sickness rooms filled, it was this room, more than any other corner of the shop, that saw its custom double and triple within a single season. Every household in the parish wanting sweet bags and strewing herbs and pomanders in whatever quantity we could supply them. There is comfort in a sweet smell during a frightening season, whatever else may or may not be true of its healing power, and comfort, in this trade as in medicine proper, is never a small thing to offer a frightened household. You finish your dozen bags as the afternoon light fades fully from the small high window, and the master gathers them into a basket for tomorrow's counter, and sends you home, as he often does at the close of a long day's work, with the quiet observation that you have done well, and the reminder, gentle but firm, that tomorrow the garden will want tending again. Whatever the weather, since the garden, unlike the shop's ledgers or its customers, keeps no patience at all for a day's postponement. There is one particular order for sweet bags come autumn. That teaches you more about this quiet corner of the trade than all the ordinary dozens you have stitched before it. A wool merchant of the parish sends word that his eldest daughter is to be married in the spring, and that her mother wishes the girl's lanen chest, the trousseau every bride of any standing carries into her new household, packed and scented properly before the wedding, a full season in advance, so that by the time the chest is opened in her husband's house, every sheet and shift and undergarment within it will have taken on, slowly and thoroughly, the particular fragrance the family has chosen to mark their daughter's new beginning. This is no small order, the master tells you, laying out on the marble slab a quantity of dried lavender and orris root, and dried rose petals far greater than any single sweet bag has ever required of you before. A trousseau chest is scented not for a season but, in a sense, for a whole marriage. The bride will open that chest 100 times in the years ahead, reaching for a good sheet or a fine shift, and each time, if we have done our work rightly, she will meet, faintly, the same fragrance that filled the room on the morning she left her father's house, and it will call that morning back to her. A little, whether she wishes it to or not. Scent has that particular power, more than almost anything else we make in this room. It does not merely perfume linen. It keeps a small living thread strung between one day of a person's life and every later day the linen is touched. You spend the better part of a week on the order, filling and stitching not a dozen, but several dozen sweet bags, some meant to be tucked between the folded layers of the chest itself, and others, larger and more thickly filled, meant to hang from the chest's inner lid, where the household's warmth will draw their scent out most steadily over the long months of storage before the wedding. And the master shows you, besides, how a length of cedar wood, rubbed lightly with a little of the same scented oil used for the gloves, can be laid along the chest's base to protect the linen further, and lend the whole assembly a deeper, longer-lasting note beneath the lighter lavender and rose. When the finished chest is delivered, some weeks later, the wool merchant's wife herself comes to the shop to thank the master in person, and tells him, with tears standing frankly in her eyes, that she opened the chest that very morning to add a final embroidered cloth, and found the whole room outside it filled, for a moment, with the sweetest and gentlest fragrance she has smelled in years, and that she believed, standing there, she could already feel some part of her daughter's happiness folded safely away inside it. You watch the wool merchant's wife dab gently at her eyes with a corner of her own sleeve, and notice in that small unguarded gesture how thoroughly a scent chosen with real care can reach past a person's ordinary composure, further and more gently than words alone so often manage. The master says very little in reply to this, only bows his head slightly and thanks her for her custom, but you notice, watching him from your place at the counter, that he is quieter than usual for the remainder of that afternoon. And when at last the shop empties, and the two of you are alone again among the shelves. He tells you, in a voice pitched lower even than his usual quiet register in this room, that it is moments exactly like that one, more than any grand sale to any noble household, that remind him why he has given the whole of his working life to a trade that most of the city, if pressed, would call a small and unserious one, a trade of mere pleasant smells rather than true medicine. Let them call it small, he says. I have seen what a well-chosen scent can do for a frightened patient, and I have seen, now, what it can do folded quietly into a bride's linen chest. I no longer trouble myself to argue the point with anyone who cannot see it for themselves. The washing bowls, too, you learn that same season, have their own quiet place in a household's larger preparations for a wedding, since a bride of any standing is expected to arrive at her new household not only with a scented chest of linen, but with her own small store of finer soap besides, set apart from whatever plainer soap the new household's own kitchen and washroom keep in daily use. The master shows you, for this particular order, a refinement of the ordinary washing ball you have not yet attempted, a smaller, more delicate version worked with a finer grade of oil and a heavier hand of orris root, wrapped once cured in a small square of painted paper, rather than sold loose from the bowl, since a bride's own soap, he explains, is meant to sit visibly on the edge of her new washing basin, a small daily reminder, however modest, of the household and the trade that sent her into her marriage properly prepared. There is a whole quiet language in these small gifts, child. He tells you, wrapping a dozen of the finished, finer balls in their painted paper with careful hands, that most young apprentices overlook entirely, thinking only of the rose or the orris root itself, and never of what it means to the person receiving it. A bride far from her own mother's house, in a new household she does not yet fully know, opens her linen chest on a difficult homesick morning and meets, there, a scent chosen with real care on her behalf, and it comforts her a little, in a way no single sentence of advice her mother might have given her at parting ever quite manages to. We do not make these things merely to be sold, in the end. We make them, at our best, to be found again later, on exactly the morning a person most needs finding. The strewing herbs, too, find their own quiet place in a household's wedding preparations. You learn that same season, since custom in this city asks, that the path from a bride's own door to the church, and again from the church to her new husband's threshold, be strewn fresh that very morning with the sweetest herbs a family can gather or afford to purchase, meadowsweet and lavender, and the small fragrant violets that linger late into the season along certain shaded walls, so that a bride's whole procession through the streets passes over crushed, fragrant ground rather than the ordinary dust and stone of an unremarked morning. The master sends you out for the wool merchant's daughter's own wedding morning, before first light, to help lay this fragrant path, with two of the household's own servants, and you find, kneeling in the cold pale dawn, to scatter the last generous handful of lavender across the church steps, a small unexpected happiness in the work, a sense of your own quiet labor becoming, for one bride on one particular morning, part of the very ground beneath her wedding feet. Let us turn now to a part of this trade that lives, strangely, mostly outside the perfume room itself, out among the rushes at the river's edge and the meadow grasses beyond the city wall, though its purpose belongs entirely to the same quiet aim that governs everything else you have learned so far within these 4 dark, shelved walls. On a morning some weeks into your apprenticeship, the master sends you not to the walled rose garden, nor to the orange trees, but down a different path entirely, along the slow green river that runs through the lower part of the city, to a stretch of shallow marshy ground, where tall rushes grow thick and green, and where a handful of other apprentices, from other shops in the same trade, are already at work with sickles, cutting the long stems and bundling them for carrying. Every floor in this city that can afford it, the master tells you, walking beside you along the riverbank, is strewn with rushes, changed as often as the household's means allow. And a household that changes its rushes often and mixes fragrant herbs among them is a household that smells and is generally thought to be cleaner and healthier than one that lets its old rushes go stale and sour underfoot. This has been the custom in this country and in others to its north for longer than anyone now living can say with certainty. And though it may strike you, coming from a room full of copper stills and silver pomanders, as a very humble sort of trade to trouble ourselves with, it is, in its quiet way, one of the oldest branches of what we do here. You spend the morning learning the cutting and bundling of rushes alongside the other apprentices, a rougher, more outdoor labor than the careful indoor work of the perfume room. Your hands soon green-stained and faintly cut from the sharp edges of the reeds, and when the rushes are cut and bundled, the master leads you further along the bank and up into the meadow beyond, where he shows you a different kind of gathering, meadow-sweet with its frothy cream-colored flower heads, and a sweet, almost honeyed scent, wild mint growing thick along a drainage ditch, tansy with its small hard yellow buttons, and a scent sharp enough to keep certain insects at a respectful distance, and a low creeping herb the country people call basil, though it bears little relation, the master notes, to the true sweet basil grown in kitchen gardens for cooking, strewing herbs, he explains, filling his own basket alongside yours, mixed in among the rushes themselves, a handful here, a handful there, not so much as to overwhelm a room, but enough that a footstep across the floor releases, faintly, a little of their scent into the air, over and over, all day, without anyone in the room needing to do a single thing to earn it. Meadowsweet for its sweetness, mint for its freshness, and because fleas, I am told, dislike it, though whether that is true or merely a comfortable, old belief we have all agreed to trust, I could not say for certain. Tansy and rue for the same reason, sharp enough to discourage the small crawling nuisances every household in this city contends with in the warmer months. Lavender where a household can spare it, for the same reason we favor it in the sweet bags, its scent lasting longer underfoot than almost anything else we might scatter there. The morning's gathering fills both your baskets well before midday, and the walk back into the city, laden now with the mingled green scent of cut rushes and wild herbs, carries a different pleasure than the careful indoor mornings you have grown used to in the perfume room, a broader, plainer pleasure, the ordinary contentment of honest outdoor labor well done, and you find yourself walking back through the city gate with the master and the other apprentices, in no particular hurry to reach the shop and trade this wide green morning for the narrow dim room that waits there. You will notice, the master says, as the walled gardens of the city give way to its close-packed streets once more. That this branch of our trade asks very little of the fine training your nose has been slowly acquiring these past weeks. Any household, if it has the will and the means, can gather rushes and strewing herbs for itself, and many do, without any apothecary's help at all. We sell this service mainly to households too grand or too occupied with other cares to gather their own, and mainly, too, in the warmer months, when the difference a well-strewn floor makes to a room's air becomes something even the least attentive nose in the household begins to notice. It is not the grandest branch of this trade. It will never earn this shop the custom of a magistrate's household, the way a fine pomander might. But I would ask you not to think less of it for that, child. A shop that tends carefully to its humbler branches earns, over the long years, a different kind of trust from its neighbors than a shop that chases only its grandest customers, and trust of that ordinary daily kind in a city where every household within walking distance is a potential customer for the whole of a working life, is worth cultivating every bit as patiently as a rose garden. You carry that thought home with you that evening, along with the green riverbank scent, still clinging faintly to your hands and your sleeves, and find, turning it over in your mind as you fall asleep, that it settles something in you that the grander lessons of the still and the pomander paste had not quite reached. A sense that this whole trade, for all its rare and costly ingredients, its ambergris and civet and true musk, rests finally on something plainer and steadier underneath, the same patient daily care, extended equally to a magistrate's pomander and a humble household's rushes, because both, in their own measure, are simply a household's quiet wish to live inside a scent that comforts rather than assaults them. The master, walking beside you on a later gathering morning, tells you once quietly, and without any wish to alarm you, of a harder season some years before your own apprenticeship began, when a sickness passed through this quarter of the city, and the ordinary daily trade in rushes and sweet bags and pastilles swelled, almost overnight, into something closer to the whole of the shop's business for the better part of a summer. We could not keep pace with the demand. He tells you, his voice even and measured, the way he speaks of every difficult thing in this trade. And I remember standing in this very meadow, cutting rushes myself alongside apprentices half my age, because every hand in the shop was needed, and there was no one left to spare for the counter alone. I do not tell you this to frighten you, child, only so that you understand that this quiet, humble corner of our work has, in its own history, mattered a very great deal to a great many frightened households, in years harder than the one either of us is living through now. I hope with my whole heart that you never see a season like that one yourself. But if you do, you will know already, from this ordinary morning's gathering, exactly what will be asked of you, and you will not find yourself unprepared for it. You walk the rest of the way back to the city gate in a thoughtful quiet after this, the green weight of the gathered herbs settling comfortably into the rhythm of your steps, and find that the master's plain, unhurried telling of a hard season past has not frightened you at all, only deepened, a little further, your sense of why this humble branch of the trade deserves the same careful attention the grandest pomander receives. The resins, too, hold their own quieter seasonal rhythm. You learn as the weeks turn further toward the year's colder half, since the merchants who carry frankincense and myrrh and storax into the city time their largest deliveries deliberately to arrive before the season when churches and grand households alike burn the most incense. The long stretch of solemn feast days and quiet vigils that the colder months bring in their turn. The master shows you, on the morning one such delivery arrives, how to judge a fresh shipment of resin by sight and by touch before ever committing the shop's coin to it. The pale golden tears of the finest frankincense, sorted carefully from the darker, cheaper grade mixed in among them by merchants, hoping a buyer's eye will not trouble itself to look closely enough, and you spend a long unhurried morning at his side, sorting a whole sack of raw resin tier by tier into its proper grades, your fingers growing faintly sticky with the released fragrance of the work, until the afternoon light has shifted and the sorted piles sit neat and separated on the marble slab, ready for the season's coming demand. A merchant respects a buyer who sorts his own delivery carefully. The master tells you, brushing the last resin dust from his hands, far more than he respects one who simply trusts whatever is poured into his sack without a second look. It costs us a morning's labor each time a shipment arrives, and I will not pretend otherwise. But it has saved this shop over the years a great deal more than a morning's worth of coin. And it has taught every apprentice who has ever sorted a sack of resin at this slab a further lesson about the whole of this trade, which is that even the humblest sorting task, done with real attention, protects the finer work that follows it. By the time the sorted piles sit ready on their separate cloths, the afternoon light has gone soft and low through the small high window, and the master allows himself, and you beside him, a rare unhurried pause before the day's remaining tasks call you both back to the ordinary business of the shop. The two of you simply standing a moment among the neat separated resins, breathing in the mingled sweetness that a whole morning's careful sorting has released into the room, content, for once, to do nothing further at all beyond notice how fully the small quiet room has filled, once again, with the particular fragrant hush that first drew you through its door. Let us turn now, some weeks further into the story, to a different shelf entirely, one you had noticed early on without daring to ask about it. A row of small dark lumps and knotted tiers of resin kept in a wooden box near the still, and to the slow fragrant smoke that rises from them when the master, on a particular kind of evening, sets a few grains upon a small heated dish and lets them do quietly their own patient work. Frankincense, the master says, lifting a small pale golden tear of resin from the box and holding it up to the light, where it glows faintly amber, comes to us from very far away indeed, further than the Ambergris even, carried by ship and by caravan from lands so distant that I confess I know their names only from the merchants who bring the resin to our door, and could not find them for you on any map I own. It has been burned in temples and churches, this same resin, for longer than any written record of this trade extends, valued for a fragrance that no flower, however fine, has ever quite matched. Warm and resinous, and somehow both sweet and solemn at once. He shows you, that evening, the small heated dish, a shallow iron plate warmed gently over a low coal rather than an open flame, since an open flame, he explains, burns the resin too fast and coarsens its scent, while a gentle steady heat coaxes the fragrance out slowly. in thin curling ribbons of pale smoke that rise and spread through the room with a patience that matches, in its way, everything else you have learned here about how a scent ought properly to be released into the world. Myrrh, he continues, setting beside the frankincense a darker, more reddish resin, comes from the same distant trade routes, a heavier, more bitter fragrance than frankincense, used as much in medicine, in wound dressings, and in certain remedies for the mouth and gums, as in perfumery proper, though we blend the two together often, the sweetness of the one softening the bitterness of the other, into a smoke that a great many of the city's finer churches and finer households alike favor for solemn occasions, a funeral, a saint's day, an evening when the household wishes the air itself to carry some quiet gravity. And beside the mirror, a third resin, paler and softer, that the master names storax, and a fourth, gum benzoin, the same softened resin, you realize, that binds the pomander paste together. And he explains to you, laying the 4 resins out together on the marble slab, like a small quiet council of elders, how the perfumer's true art with resins lies not merely in burning them singly, but in grinding and blending them together, along with a careful measure of powdered spices, cinnamon and clove, and a little grated nutmeg, and a binding syrup of gum arabic dissolved in rosewater, into a soft workable paste that can then be shaped, while still pliable, into small pastilles no larger than a coin, dried slowly over several days until they hold their form, and burned one at a time as needed, releasing their whole careful blend of scent in a single small fragrant coal. A well-made pastille, he says, working a small measure of the blended paste between his fingers to show you its proper consistency, neither too wet to hold its shape nor too dry to crumble, will scent an entire room for the better part of an hour, slowly, evenly, without ever growing sharp or overwhelming, the way a resin burned alone sometimes can. Great households keep a box of them always at hand, for a guest's arrival, for a sick room that wants comforting, for the quiet close of an evening when the family has retired, and only the steward remains to see the last candles out and the last pastille burning low in its dish. You spend the following several evenings, once the shop's ordinary daytime custom has quieted, learning the grinding and blending of this particular paste, the resins first pounded fine in a small stone mortar kept apart from every other mortar in the shop, since the master will not risk even a trace of yesterday's crushed herbs mingling into today's careful resin blend, and then worked with the same slow attentive, kneading the pomander paste demanded, into a smooth even mass and shaped with small wooden molds the master has owned longer than you have been apprenticed here, into the neat round pastilles that will, once dried and cured, find their way into the small lacquered boxes sold to the city's finer households. The scent of the resins clings to the perfume room differently than the scent of the roses or the orange blossom did, heavier and slower to fade, settling into the very wood of the shelves and the stone of the hearth in a way that the lighter floral waters never quite managed. And you find, working late into these particular evenings with the low coal glowing and a thin ribbon of frankincense smoke curling up toward the small high window, that this corner of the room's work carries a different feeling than the rest, quieter, older, closer somehow to the solemn hush of a church than to the bright domestic pleasure of a scented glove or a filled sweet bag. The master, watching you work one such evening, seems to read something of this feeling in your face and offers, in his own quiet way, something close to an explanation. Every scent in this room serves a different hour of a person's life, he says, banking the low coal for the night. The rosewater serves the morning, the washing basin, the fresh beginning of a day. The gloves and the pomanders serve the daylight hours, the street, the shop counter, the business of being seen and known among one's neighbors. But the resins, child, these belong to the evening and to the graver hours besides, the sick room, the vigil, the solemn close of a day or a life. A perfumer who has not learned to serve all of these hours equally well has not yet learned the whole of his trade, however fine his rosewater might be. There is one further resin the master keeps apart from the others, in a smaller box lined with its own square of soft cloth, that he does not show you until several weeks into your work with the pastilles, a dark, dense lump he names storax proper, distinct from the paler resin of the same rough family. You have already learned, gathered, he tells you, from a tree that grows in warm country to the east, and prized in this room above the ordinary storax for the particular sweetness it lends a pastille meant for the grandest sick-room orders. The kind commissioned by a household anxious enough about a loved one's fever to want the very finest comfort money in this city can purchase. He shows you, too, on a quiet evening not long after, a second and gentler use for the resins, beyond the burning dish, a soft ointment built by warming a little of the softened benzoin into the almond oil you have already learned to infuse on the windowsill, meant to be rubbed, sparingly, at the temples or the wrists of a sleepless patient, half medicine and half simple comfort, the two purposes so thoroughly braided together in this room. You are coming to understand that the master himself no longer troubles to separate them in his own thinking. A physician treats the body, he tells you, working the warm ointment between his palms until it softens to the right consistency. On does necessary work I would never claim to rival. But a physician cannot always sit through the whole of a long fevered night at a patient's bedside, and a household left alone in the dark hours of such a night wants something for its own hands to do, some small warm ritual of care it can offer, while it waits for the fever to break or the morning to come, whichever arrives first. This ointment is that ritual, more than it is any true cure. I do not oversell it to my customers as more than that, and you must never oversell it either, once you are trusted to speak for this room yourself. But do not undersell it either, child. A frightened household comforted through a long night is no small thing. However, plainly you might describe the modest jar of scented oil that helped them through it. Let us turn now to the three ingredients that the master has, until this point in your apprenticeship, kept always at a careful distance from your untrained hands. The three he calls, when he speaks of them at all, the animal heart of the whole perfume room, musk, civet, and ambergris, and to the particular evening, some 3 months into your time here, when he finally judges you ready to be told their full story. You have smelled all three already, he says, setting before you on the marble slab the small weighted jar of civet paste, a tiny stoppered vial no larger than your thumb, containing a few dark grains of true musk, and the grey waxen lump of ambergris you first saw named on your very first evening in this room, though only ever in their proper small measure, folded into a pomander or a glove oil or a pastille, where their strangeness is tamed by everything blended around them. Tonight I want you to smell each of them alone, in the raw, so that you understand fully what it is you have been working with all these weeks, and why these 3 ingredients, more than any flower or resin in this room, command the prices they do. He opens the civet jar first, and the smell that rises from it is exactly as strong and as strange as the faint warning he gave you weeks ago had promised. Heavy and animal, and, to your untrained nose in this first close encounter, almost unpleasant, a smell your body seems to want to pull away from even as some other, more curious part of you leans closer to understand it. Civet, he explains, watching your reaction with the patient amusement of a man who has watched 100 apprentices have this exact same first reaction, is gathered from a small animal kept for the purpose in certain warm countries far to the south, a creature not unlike a cat in its general shape, though no true relation to one, which produces this paste as part of its own natural constitution. The gathering of it, from what the merchants who bring it to us describe, is neither pleasant nor gentle work, and I will not pretend to you otherwise, though it is work done far from this room, in lands and by hands I have never seen with my own eyes, and I can tell you only what I have been told of it, not what I know firsthand. What I can tell you with certainty is what happens to civet once it reaches a room like this one, which is that a substance almost unbearable in its raw concentrated strength becomes, diluted to the smallest fraction the moment it is folded into a larger blend, one of the most valuable tools a perfumer possesses, because civet does something no flower or resin can do on its own. It fixes a scent. It slows the fading. A rosewater alone, however finely distilled, breathes itself away into the air within an hour or 2 of its application. A rosewater with the faintest trace of civet worked into its base clings to the skin for the better part of a day, the rose note riding, so to speak, on the civet's broader and more patient shoulders. He stoppers the jar again, and the room's air, which had grown thick with the raw scent, begins slowly to clear, and he moves next to the small vial of musk, opening it only briefly, a few careful seconds, before sealing it once more. True musk, he says, comes from further still, from a small deer that lives high in cold mountains east of every land our merchants themselves have ever traveled, gathered. Again, in a manner I know only by report and not by witness, and priced, grain for grain, above nearly everything else that passes through this room, even ambergris on most years. Its power is even more concentrated than civet's, a single grain enough to scent an entire batch of pomander paste, and its particular gift, beyond the fixing that civet also provides, is a kind of warmth, a roundness that no plant ingredient in this room can replicate. Flowers give a perfume its face, child, the bright recognizable thing a person names, first when they smell it, rose or orange blossom, or lavender. Musk and civet give it its body, the part felt more than named, the part that makes a stranger lean a little closer without quite knowing why. Last, he turns to the ambergris, breaking off with a small knife a shaving no larger than a fingernail paring from the larger waxen lump, and warms it briefly between his palms before holding it out for you to smell, and this scent, unlike the other 2, does not make you want to pull away at all. A strange and complicated fragrance, sweet and marine and something like tobacco or old wood, utterly unlike anything else in the room, familiar and foreign at once. Ambergris, he says, is the strangest ingredient of all the three, and the one whose true origin the trade itself has argued over for longer than I have been alive. Some say it comes from the great whales of the deep ocean, cast up on distant shores after long years adrift on the tide, aged by salt water and sun, until it becomes what you smell now. Others hold to older tales, that it is a kind of amber grown on the ocean floor, or the dried foam of some sea creature no one now living has ever seen whole. Whatever its true source, and I confess to you honestly, child, that I do not know it with certainty myself, it reaches this room already aged for years, sometimes for decades, before ever a merchant sells it, because ambergris improves with age, in a way none of our other ingredients do, growing softer and sweeter and more complex the longer the seed and the sun have had to work upon it before we ever set hands on it ourselves. What you smell in your palm tonight has likely been drifting or resting in some merchant's careful storage for longer than you yourself have been alive. You hold the small, warm shaving a long moment, breathing it in slowly, the way every lesson in this room has taught you to breathe in a scent, first note and second note, and the low lasting note beneath both, and find that this one, more than any other single ingredient the room has shown you so far, seems to hold something almost meditative in it, a scent that asks to be sat with rather than simply noted and moved past. These three, the master says, taking the shaving gently back from your open palm and returning it to its lump, ere the reason a fine perfume costs what it costs, and the reason certain households, however grand, still choose to do without the finest of our wares and content themselves with plain rosewater and a modest sweet bag. We use them sparingly, always, a grain here, a shaving there, folded so deep into a larger blend that most who wear our finished work could never name, smelling only the finished perfume. What strange and costly things had gone into its making. That, I think, is as it should be. The customer need not know every secret of this room to enjoy its fruits. But you, child, now that you are further along in this trade than you were 3 months ago, should know all of it. The raw and the strange along with the sweet and the familiar, because a perfumer who works only ever with the pleasant parts of this craft, and never troubles himself to understand the stranger parts beneath, will never rise, in this trade, past the middling rank of a competent tradesman. The finest work, in this room as in most others I have known, comes only to those willing to sit patiently with what is strange until it stops frightening them and starts instead teaching them something. He tells you that same evening a little of how these three costly things travel to reach a shelf as ordinary looking as the one in front of you, a long chain of hands and ships and caravans that neither of you will ever see with your own eyes, merchants trading in a dozen ports, along a dozen coastlines, a single lump of ambergris changing hands 3 or 4 times before ever a Florentine buyer sees it, a grain of musk carried down out of mountains further east than most maps this shop owns even attempt to show with any confidence. I have never once left this city, child, in the whole of my working life, he says, something wistful entering his usually even voice. And yet every single evening I stand in this room surrounded by the whole wide world, brought to my own hands by merchants braver, or perhaps merely more restless than I have ever been myself. There is a kind of humility owed to that, I think, We did not discover these things ourselves. We only learned, patiently, what to do with them once other hands had already carried them this far. He shows you, too, how to test a merchant's claim before ever paying his asking price, since the trade in these three rare things draws its share of dishonest dealing: ambergris cut with cheaper wax, musk grains stretched with dried blood or resin, civet paste thinned with lesser oils, to stretch a merchant's profit at a buyer's expense. A true grain of musk, he teaches you, releases its scent slowly and evenly when warmed gently between the fingers, never sharply nor all at once. True ambergris softens under gentle heat and releases an oil that leaves no greasy residue behind on the skin, where a cheaper wax will not soften properly at all, or will leave a telltale film. I lost a full week's wages to a dishonest merchant in my first year of trading for myself. He admits, with the same dry humor he brought to the tale of the finest Spanish gloves. I do not tell you this so that you distrust every merchant who comes to this door. Most are honest, and this shop's custom over years depends on trusting them in turn. I tell you only so that your own nose and your own hands become, over time, a second check against the rare dishonest one, because a costly mistake made once in this trade is a costly mistake a careful apprentice need never make twice. One particular merchant, a quiet, weathered man named Salvestro, who has supplied this shop with its rarer goods for as long as the master has held it, becomes, over the following month, something closer to a familiar friend of the room than an ordinary tradesman passing briefly through it. He arrives perhaps 4 times a year, always announced well in advance by a boy sent ahead with a note, and always received by the master with a particular warmth that you have not seen extended to any other visitor to the shop, customer or supplier alike. He brings, on the visit that falls within your own first year here, not only the expected ambergris and musk, but a small separate parcel, wrapped apart from the rest, which he sets before the master with a quiet ceremony of his own. A curiosity, Salvestro says, unwrapping the parcel to reveal a lump of resin unlike anything you have yet seen on the shop's own shelves, darker and stranger smelling than the frankincense or myrrh you know well, gathered from a tree further east than even my own furthest travels have taken me, and passed to me by a fellow trader who swore it would interest a nose as particular as yours, Maestro. The master leans close, breathes it in slowly, and his eyebrows lift very slightly, the closest thing to open surprise you have yet seen cross his careful features. He purchases the whole small parcel on the spot, at a price you sense, from the brief negotiation that follows, is not small, and spends the better part of the following week testing the strange resin in small, careful trials at the marble slab, folding a trace of it into first one blend, and then another, chasing, you come to understand, some particular quality he cannot yet fully name, but recognizes unmistakably the moment he encounters it. This is the whole pleasure of a trade like ours, child, he tells you, turning the dark resin in his fingers on the 3rd evening of his trials, that a room full of ingredients, gathered from half the known world, can still, after 30 years, hand you something entirely new to learn on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon from a merchant you have known for 20 of those same 30 years. I hope this trade never stops surprising me in exactly this way, and I hope, in your own turn, it never stops surprising you either. Let us turn now on a quieter evening some weeks later, to an object that has sat throughout your whole apprenticeship on a high shelf near the door, one you had noticed but never yet been allowed to open. A heavy leather-bound book with a brass clasp. Its pages, when the master finally lifts it down and lays it before you, filled edge to edge with a small careful hand. Entries upon entries in faded brown ink. Some of them, by their look, many decades old. This, the master says, resting his hand flat upon the closed cover for a moment before opening it, is the true treasure of this room, more valuable to me, and to whoever comes after me in this shop, than any lump of ambergris or grain of true musk kept on these shelves. This is the recipe book, kept by every master of this room, in turn since the shop itself was first founded, each master adding his own discoveries and refinements to what the masters before him recorded, and each master, in his own turn, choosing carefully which apprentice he will finally trust to read it whole. He opens the heavy cover, and the pages within are dense with recipes, quantities and proportions and small marginal notes, in at least 3 or 4 different hands across the generations, some entries crossed out and corrected, others marked with a small symbol the master explains was his own master's private notation for a recipe judged, after long trial, to have finally been perfected beyond further improvement. Not everything written here works as written. He warns you, turning the pages slowly. See here, in my own master's hand, a recipe for a rose and musk water that he notes, in the margin, failed 3 times before he understood that the fault lay not in his proportions, but in distilling the roses a full day too late in their bloom. See here, further on, a note of mine own, added only 2 years past, on a particular blend of orange flower and ambergris, that took me the better part of a decade of small failures to arrive at properly. This book is not a book of certainties, child. It is a book of hard-won understanding, recorded so that the apprentice who comes after need not spend his own decade rediscovering what an earlier hand has already, painfully, worked out. He turns finally to a page near the back of the volume, mostly blank, waiting, and looks at you with an expression you have not seen from him before, something both solemn and, beneath the solemnity, quietly warm. Some of what is written in the earlier pages of this book, he says, has already begun to be lost elsewhere in this city, as older masters die and their own private notes go unread by heirs with no interest in the trade, or are sold off piecemeal to settle a debt, or simply crumble unread in some forgotten chest. I tell you this not to frighten you, but so that you understand what I am asking of you, now that I have finally opened this book to you. A recipe unused and unrecorded further does not survive a single generation past the master who last practiced it. I am not asking you tonight to memorize every page before you. I am asking you to understand, from this evening forward, that your work in this room is not only the making of rosewater and pomanders for this year's custom. It is also, in its quiet way, the keeping alive of something that a great many hands before yours, going back further than either of us can trace with certainty, worked very hard to discover and did not want to see forgotten. You sit with the heavy book open before you a long while that evening, tracing with your eyes the faded brown ink of recipes recorded by hands now decades or even a century in their graves, and feel settle over you a particular kind of quiet weight, not a burden exactly, but something adjacent to one, the weight of being handed, gently and deliberately. A small corner of something larger and older than your own life, and being asked, without any dramatic ceremony at all, only to carry it forward a little further than it has yet traveled. In the weeks that follow, the master begins, a little at a time, to let you make your own first small entries in the book's later pages. Nothing so grand yet as a full recipe of your own devising. Only careful notes on the recipes you have already learned, your own observations on which week of the rose season yields the fullest water, your own record of the small mistake with the rushed fire and the lesson it taught you, set down in your own still forming hand beneath the master's watchful correction of your spelling and your grammar, since he insists gently but firmly that a recipe recorded carelessly is nearly as useless to the apprentice who reads it decades hence as no recipe at all. You find, writing these first careful notes, a satisfaction unlike any other the room has yet given you, a sense of your own small voice joining, however humbly, the long quiet chorus of hands that filled these pages before you. And when the master reads over your first completed page one evening and nods, once, in that particular quiet way that has come to mean, between the two of you, real and considered approval, you feel it settle into you as deeply as any of the room's finest fragrances ever have. This is how the trade truly survives, child, he tells you, closing the book gently over your own freshly written page, not in any single grand recipe, however fine, but in this slow accumulation of small, careful hands, each one adding a little, correcting a little, trusting the next hand to carry it further still. I did not understand this so plainly when I was your age, sitting where you are sitting now, my own hand still clumsy on the page. I understand it very plainly now, and I am glad, more glad than I have perhaps told you before, to be the one passing it to you. He shows you, too, on a later evening, a small separate section near the very front of the book, kept apart from the ordinary recipes, where each master in turn has recorded not a formula, but a short private accounting of his own years in this room, a kind of quiet memoir folded into the working pages, and reads you aloud, by the low lamplight, a passage from his own master's hand, written some 40 years before, describing a winter much like the one now settling over the city outside your own window. The same cold, the same banked fires, the same patient tending of the same unchanging shelves. It comforts me, reading this, the master admits, closing the book gently over the old passage, to know that the room felt, to him, very much as it feels to me now, and I expect, child, that some 40 years from tonight, you will read what I have written here, in my own turn, and find it comforts you in exactly the same quiet way. There is something in that continuity that no single fragrance, however fine, could ever quite provide on its own. It is, I think, the truest gift this whole trade has given me, more even than the trade itself. You ask him that evening whether he has ever thought of what he himself might write someday for the apprentice who comes after you, and he considers the question longer than you expect, turning it over with the same unhurried care he brings to every question in this room, before answering simply that he has not yet decided, but that he suspects it will have something to do with patience, and something to do with roses, and something, too, with the particular quiet pleasure of watching a nervous, uncertain child become, slowly, and almost without either of you quite noticing the exact moment it happened, someone he trusts completely with the whole of this room's careful, fragrant inheritance. Let us turn now. In the last full season of the story we are telling tonight, to the visit the Master promised you on your very first evening in this room, the visit of a lady of real consequence, and to everything that particular visit asked of you and taught you in the days both before and after it. Word of the visit reaches the shop nearly a month in advance, carried by a household steward in fine livery, who asks for the Master by name and speaks to him quietly at the counter for some minutes before departing again. And when the Master returns to the back room afterward, you notice a particular seriousness settle over him, not worry exactly, but a heightened, careful attention, the same attention you have watched him bring to a difficult distillation, turned now toward the whole shop rather than a single copper vessel. A Countess, he tells you, once the front room has quieted for the evening, or of one of the old families, allied by marriage to the ruling house of this city, will call here herself, in person, a month from now, to commission a scent of her own, a blend made and kept for her alone, and worn, I am told, by no one else in the city under any circumstance. This is not the first such commission this shop has undertaken in my years here, but it is the grandest, and I will tell you plainly, child, that everything you have learned in this room across these last months, the roses and the orange blossom, the pomander paste, the oils, the resins, the whole slow, patient education of your nose, was building, whether either of us knew it clearly at the time, toward exactly this kind of work. Over the weeks that follow, the ordinary rhythm of the perfume room bends itself increasingly around the coming visit. The Master spends several evenings alone at the marble slab, working through combinations you are not yet permitted to watch closely, discarding one attempt after another with a small shake of his head, a private standard of judgment you have come to recognize, but still cannot fully name yourself. He questions you, too, in these weeks, more searchingly than he has before, asking you to describe back to him, in your own words, the particular character of this oil or that resin testing. You come to understand not only your memory but your nose's own growing capacity to hold a scent in mind and reason about it the way he does. A bespoke scent, he explains one evening, laying before you 3 small vials he has prepared, each a slightly different balance of rose, orange blossom, and a whisper of ambergris beneath both, is not simply our finest ordinary blend, made in a larger measure. It must answer to the particular person who will wear it, her age, her standing, the season of the year she favors most, even, in a strange way that took me many years to trust fully, something in her own bearing and manner, that a good perfumer learns to read, almost the way a physician reads a patient's pulse. I do not yet know this lady well enough to say with certainty which of these 3 is closest to what she will want. That is, in part, what the visit itself is for. He asks you, that evening, to smell each of the 3 vials in turn, and to tell him, without troubling yourself over whether your answer is the correct one, which of the 3 you yourself find most beautiful, and you take your time over the question, the way every lesson in this room has taught you to take your time, breathing each one in slowly, first note and second note, and the low note beneath, and settle finally on the middle vial, the one where the ambergris sits lowest and most restrained beneath the floral brightness above it. And the Master, hearing your answer, allows himself a small private smile, and says only, "Good. That is my own favorite too, though we shall see soon enough whether the Countess agrees with either of us." There is a further test the master insists upon before any of the 3 vials is allowed to stand as a true candidate, one you have not seen him practice with any ordinary blend before, since ordinary blends are judged, in this room, by the nose alone, fresh from the vial, and are trusted to prove themselves in the wearing only afterward, once already sold. A commission of this consequence, he tells you, cannot be trusted to a single fresh impression alone. He dabs a small measure of each of the 3 candidates onto 3 separate strips of clean linen, marks each strip discreetly with a thread of a different color, so that neither of you will be tempted to judge by memory rather than by nose, and sets all 3 aside on a shelf apart from the room's other work, to be smelled again the following morning, and again at midday, and again as evening falls, so that the 2 of you might learn together how each blend behaves, not merely in its first bright moment, but across the whole slow unfolding of an ordinary day, the way a real perfume, worn on real skin through a real morning and a real evening, is asked to behave. The exercise teaches you something the fresh vials alone could not have taught you nearly so plainly. The vial you and the master both favored at first smelling proves, by midday, to have grown a little thin, its bright top notes faded further than either of you expected, while the second vial, the one you set aside almost without a second thought the evening before, reveals itself by evening to hold its warmth and its roundness far longer than you had given it credit for, the low ambergris note beneath it rising, patiently, exactly as the hours pass and the brighter notes above it begin their own natural fading. "You see now," the master says, holding all 3 strips to the light of the low evening lamp, and passing each in turn beneath your nose one final time, "why I do not trust a single fresh impression with work of this weight. A scent that dazzles for a single hour and fades by noon is no true gift to a lady who must wear it through a whole long day at court. We will build her blend, in the end, closer to the second vial's own steady honesty than to the first vial's brighter, briefer charm, tempered further still with whatever her own particular preference, once we have heard it from her own lips, asks us to adjust. You add this lesson, that same week, to the small careful notes you have lately begun keeping in the great recipe book's own later pages, your own hand recording for the first time. Not merely a recipe, but the patient method by which a recipe of real consequence ought properly to be tested before it is ever offered to the person it is meant to serve. On the appointed morning, the shop is scrubbed and swept with more than its usual care. Fresh rushes laid on the front room floor, mixed with a generous measure of lavender and meadowsweet from your own gathering weeks before, and the master himself dresses in his finer coat, the one you have seen him wear perhaps twice before in all your months here, for the guild's own feast days. You are set to work early clearing and polishing every surface of the perfume room itself, since the master has decided, after some private consideration, that the Countess will be received not merely at the front counter, but, as a mark of the particular trust this commission requires, in the back room itself, among the shelves and the still and the small marble slab where the real work of this trade is done. She arrives a little after midday, attended by 2 women of her household, and the same liveried steward who first brought word of her coming. And though you have imagined this moment for a full month now, nothing quite prepares you for the particular quiet stir her arrival brings to the shop. Not loud, not grand in any showy way, but unmistakable all the same. The careful stillness with which the master greets her at the door, the deference in his bow, the low measured warmth of his voice as he welcomes her inside and leads her, at her own request, straight back toward the room where the real work waits. She is, you find yourself noticing as she moves through the shop, neither young nor old, dressed richly but not extravagantly, in a dark green gown trimmed with a modest embroidery at the cuff and collar, and she carries herself with an unhurried, attentive composure that reminds you oddly a little of the master's own manner in this room. The stillness of someone accustomed to giving her full careful attention to whatever is placed before her. She examines the shelves of the perfume room with open, unguarded curiosity, asking the master brief questions about this jar or that hanging pomander, and he answers each one with the same patient thoroughness he has always shown you, neither hurried nor overly deferential. And you understand, watching this quiet exchange, something further about why this particular shop, among all the Spezieria of the city, has earned the custom of households like hers. I am told, she says at last, turning from the shelves to face the master directly, that you make sense unlike any other house in this city, Maestro. My own mother wore a blend from your predecessor's hand for the whole of her later years, and I confess I have never forgotten it, though I could not now tell you a single ingredient it held. I would like something of my own, something that belongs to me alone, something a stranger meeting me in a crowded room might come in time to know as mine before they even see my face. The master bows his head slightly at this and begins, in his low, unhurried voice, to ask her the questions you have watched him turn over privately these last weeks. Which flowers please her most, whether she favors the brightness of the morning or the deeper hush of evening, whether she wears her fine gowns often or keeps mostly to quieter, plainer dress, whether the scent is meant chiefly for her own private pleasure or for the wider notice of a court and a city that will, whether she wishes it or not, come to associate a particular fragrance with her particular name. She answers each question thoughtfully, unhurried herself in a way that seems, to your watching eye, to put the master further at ease with every passing minute, and at length he brings out, on a small clean cloth, the 3 vials he prepared in the preceding weeks, and asks her, exactly as he asked you, to smell each one slowly and tell him honestly which pleases her most, without regard for which she believes she ought to prefer. She takes her time over the question, as you did, closing her eyes briefly over each vial in turn, and when she finally speaks, it is the middle vial she names, the one with the low restrained ambergris beneath the rose and orange blossom, the very one you yourself chose weeks before, and the master, hearing this, allows himself again that same small private smile you saw in him that earlier evening, though he says nothing of your own earlier choice, only nods and tells her that her instinct matches his own finest work, and that he will build the whole of her bespoke blend from exactly that foundation, refined further over the coming days into something made for her alone. There is one further thing I must ask you to understand, my lady, he says, as the visit draws toward its close, which is that a blend made for you in this room will never be sold to another customer, under any circumstance, for as long as I hold this shop. This is not merely a courtesy. It is the whole point of what you have asked for. A scent made and kept for one person only becomes, over the years she wears it, something closer to a second name than a mere fragrance. And I would not undo that gift by selling even the faintest echo of it to another household, however grand. She thanks him for this assurance with evident warmth, and as she rises to leave, her eye falls briefly on you, standing quietly by the shelves, where you have remained through the whole of the long exchange, and she asks the master with mild curiosity whether you are his apprentice, and how long you have served in this room. "Nearly half a year now, my lady," the master answers, "and already, if I may say so, a nose I trust more than I trusted my own at the same stage of my own training. It was this apprentice's own instinct, in fact, that first confirmed for me, some weeks past, that the very blend you have chosen today was the finest of the three I had prepared." You feel your face grow warm at this unexpected mention, and the Countess turns her attention to you fully for a moment. A brief, considering look, neither cold nor overly familiar, and says only, with a small nod, "Then I am glad to have my instincts confirmed by two noses rather than one," before she takes her leave, attended once more by her two women, and the waiting steward, and the shop settles, in her absence, into a quiet that feels, after the careful tension of the whole morning, almost like the hush that follows a held breath finally released. The days that follow the visit belong, almost entirely, to the finishing of her commission, the master working alone at the marble slab through several long evenings, refining the chosen blend in small, careful increments, a fraction more orange blossom one evening, a fraction less ambergris the next, testing each fresh iteration against his own memory of her manner and her stated preference until, on the fifth evening, he sets down his tools at last and tells you, with the particular quiet satisfaction he reserves for work he judges truly finished, that the blend is done, and that it is, in his own private estimation, among the finest 3 or 4 things his own hands have ever made in this room. The finished perfume is delivered some days later, carried personally by the master himself in a small case lined with silk, and he returns from the delivery that evening in a mood you have not seen in him before, quiet and reflective in a way that goes beyond his usual measured calm. And when you ask him, carefully, how the lady received the finished work, he tells you only that she wept a little, briefly, and without embarrassment, upon first smelling it, and told him that it was, as near as such a thing could ever be, the scent of her own private happiness made real and carryable, and that she would wear nothing else for the whole of the rest of her life. That, the master tells you, setting his coat aside for the evening and settling onto his usual stool beside the now cold and resting still, as the whole of what this room was ever meant to do, in the end. Not merely to please a customer, nor even only to comfort a frightened household in a hard season, though it does both those things too, and does them well. At its very finest, child, what we make here gives a person back some small private piece of their own truest self, made carryable, made lasting, made theirs alone in a way almost nothing else a person can purchase in this world ever quite manages to be. I have been 30 years at this trade, and I do not know that I will ever again make anything I am prouder of than what left this shop in that small silk-lined case today. I am glad, more glad than I can easily say, that you were here to see the whole of it unfold, from the first careful weeks of my planning through to this evening's quiet ending. You will not see its like again for some years yet, I think, but when you do, and I believe in my heart that you will be ready for it in a way I could not have promised you when you first stood uncertain in that doorway, half a year ago now, breathing in this room's whole strange and beautiful smell for the very first time. Word of the Countess's commission finds its own quiet way through the city in the weeks that follow, the way such things always do, a household steward mentioning it in passing to another household steward, a merchant remarking on it to a customer while weighing out cloth, and the shop's own custom grows a little steadier through the following season for the telling of it, though the master never once speaks of the Countess by name to any of the new faces who come asking, mindful always of the promise he made her that afternoon. What he permits himself instead, on the rare evening when a new customer of some standing hints delicately at the tale, is only a small, careful nod, and the observation, offered without further detail, that this room has had the honor, once or twice in his years here, of making something for a lady of real consequence that pleased her beyond his own modest expectations, and that he hopes, one day, to have the honor again. You come to understand, watching him hold this particular confidence so carefully across the following months, one further quiet lesson of the trade that no single ingredient or technique could have taught you on its own, that a perfumer's finest work is sometimes measured not only in what he makes, but in what he afterward refuses to say about it, a discretion as carefully practiced, in its own way, as the patient blending of a bespoke scent, and every bit as necessary to a shop's long-standing in a city that watches its finer households and the tradesmen who serve them more closely than either the households or the tradesmen always like to admit. There is one further, quieter exchange between you and the master, some weeks after the Countess's commission has settled into the ordinary rhythm of the shop's continuing business, that you will carry with you in later years, as clearly as you carry the memory of that very first evening breathing in this room's whole strange fragrance for the first time. He asks you, one evening, while the two of you tend a modest, ordinary batch of household rosewater together, nothing so grand as the Countess's bespoke blend, only the plain steady work that fills most of any given week in this room. Whether you still remember what first drew you through that door, half fearful and half wondering, on your second month as his apprentice, you tell him, honestly, that you remember mostly the smell, the way it reached you before your eyes had found a single shelf to rest upon, and he nods, satisfied, and tells you that this is exactly as it should be, that the smell is always what comes first, and always what lingers longest, in every apprentice's own private memory of this room, longer even than any single lesson or any single customer's particular story. You will forget a great many of the small details I have taught you this year, he says, and there is no sadness in the observation, only a kind of settled honesty. You will forget, perhaps, the exact proportion of orris root to rose petal in a fine washing ball, or the precise number of days a glove wants steeping in its cedar chest. These are things a good recipe book can hold for you, when your own memory finally lets them go. But you will never forget this room's particular smell. Not if you live to be an old man yourself, telling this same story to your own apprentice on some quiet evening decades from now. That is the one thing this trade gives every hand that passes through it, without exception, and it is, in its way, the truest gift of all. He falls quiet for a moment after this, tending the small ordinary batch of rosewater. Between you with the same unhurried attention he brings to every distillation, grand or humble. And when he speaks again, his voice has taken on a slightly different, more distant quality, the voice you realize of a man remembering rather than teaching. I think often, these days, of my own first master's hands. He says, though he has been gone from this world some 15 years now, I could not tell you, if you asked me plainly, the precise shape of his face any longer, not with any real confidence. Faces fade, child, more than I ever expected they would when I was young enough to believe otherwise. But I could walk into a room 100 miles from here, blindfolded, and know within a single breath whether his particular blend of rose and civet had ever once been mixed within its walls. The smell has outlasted the face by a full 15 years already, and I expect, honestly, that it will outlast my own memory of nearly everything else about him before I am done with this life myself. You say nothing in reply to this, only continue the slow, careful tending of the rosewater between you, and find that the quiet settling over the room in that moment carries a particular weight, unlike any other silence the two of you have shared this past year, not sad exactly, but grave and tender, and entirely without hurry, the way the Master has taught you all along that the truest and most important things in this room are always without hurry. Let us turn now, at last, toward the ending of the year we have spent together in this room, and to the particular quiet ritual that closes every working day here. The ritual you have come, over these many months, to know better than almost any other single rhythm of your apprenticeship. The season turns again toward winter, as the story draws to its close. The walled garden beyond the city gate gone bare and brown, where the roses stood in such generous bloom when you first walked out to gather them before dawn. The orange trees along the south wall bear too of blossom, though their small bitter fruit still hangs among the dark leaves, waiting its own turn in the year's slow unfolding trade. The perfume room itself, in this quieter season, settles into a different rhythm than the busy gathering months you have grown used to. Less running out to gardens before dawn, more long patient evenings at the marble slab, finishing pomanders and pastilles for the winter's steady custom, tending the last of the year's oils on their sill, working through, page by careful page, the further contents of the great recipe book. The Master finally trusts you to study a little further with each passing week. On the particular evening this story asks you to remember, the shop has closed its front doors some hours before, the last customer of the day seen out, and the Countess swept and settled for the night. And you and the Master remain alone in the back room, tending one final small distillation, a modest batch of winter greens and dried orange peel meant for a household water the Master favors for the cold months, when the fresh flowers of summer are long past and a household must make do with what its stores can offer instead. There is a particular pleasure, the Master says, watching the last thin curl of vapor rise from the small still and settle, drop by patient drop, into its waiting vessel. Enclosing a room like this one at the end of a long day, or as tonight, at the close of a long full year. Every jar returned to its proper shelf, every fire banked to a low steady coal, rather than left to burn wastefully through the night. Every tool wiped clean and set back exactly where the hand that reaches for it tomorrow will expect to find it. There is no grand ceremony in any of this, child, and I confess I did not understand, when I was your age and newly apprenticed myself, why my own master gave such careful attention to what seemed, then, like the least interesting part of the whole day's work. I understand it now. A room cared for this carefully at its closing is a room that opens the next morning ready and willing to be worked in again, and a trade practiced for a whole working life, as I have practiced this one, is built far more from 10,000 such small careful closings than from any single grand commission, however fine. You move together through the room's familiar closing tasks, the same tasks you have performed alongside him now for the better part of a year. The still emptied and rinsed and left to dry, the marble slab wiped clean of the day's last traces of resin and oil, the shelves checked and straightened, the small high window shutter drawn against the coming cold. The scent of the room, thick with a whole year's accumulated work, settles around you as you move. Rose and orange blossom and resin, and the low warm animal note of civet and musk folded so deeply now into the very wood of the shelves that you wonder, not for the first time, whether it will ever fully fade from this room, even were every jar and vessel to be carried out of it tomorrow. You have done well this year, the master says, once the last task is finished and the two of you stand together in the room's soft lamplight. The whole quiet inventory of shelves and jars and hanging pomanders settled around you like a congregation gathered for a final evening prayer. Better, if I am honest with you, than I expected of an apprentice so young when you first walked through that door. Your nose has grown steady. Your hands have grown patient. You have learned, I think, the truest lesson this room has to teach, which is that nothing beautiful made here was ever made quickly, and nothing made quickly here was ever, in the end, truly beautiful. He reaches up to the high shelf where the great recipe book rests, and sets it once more on the marble slab, opening it not to the dense early pages you studied together weeks before, but to the blank pages near the very back, waiting, as they have waited through every master's tenure in this room, for hands not yet born to fill them. One day, he says, not soon, but one day nonetheless, a page in this section will carry your own hand, your own discoveries, your own hard-won corrections to whatever small failures teach you the most over the years still ahead of you. I will not see all of what you write there, child. No master ever sees the whole of what his apprentice becomes, once the apprentice has grown steady enough to carry the trade forward alone. But I am glad, more glad than this quiet room allows me to say plainly, to have been the one who first opened that door for you and led you through it, and watched your face that very first evening, when the whole smell of this room reached you before your eyes had even found a single shelf to rest upon. You do not know, standing there in the lamplight, with the closed shop settling into its nightly stillness around you, quite how to answer him, and so you say nothing at all, Only reach out and close the great book gently yourself, the way he has taught you to close every vessel and every door in this room, with care rather than haste. And he nods, satisfied, and lifts the book back to its high shelf and turns, at last, to bank the room's final small lamp for the night. You step together out through the door with the worn brass ring, back into the ordinary front room of the shop, and the master locks the perfume room behind you with the same unhurried care he has brought to every single task this whole long story has asked of him. And the two of you walk out together into the cold, quiet, starlit street, the shop's front door closing softly behind you, the whole small city settling around you both into the deep, unhurried hush of a winter evening. Walking home through the cold, you find your own mind turning back, unhurried and unbidden, across the whole slow procession of the year, now closing behind you, the way a person's mind will do on any evening set aside, even quietly and without ceremony, for looking backward. The rose garden at dawn, silver in the pre-dawn light before the sun ever touched it gold, the orange trees under their small white stars of blossom, the thin oil skimmed so carefully from the surface of the gathered water, the pierced silver pomanders hanging in their patient row, and the strange warm animal scents that first made you want to pull away before they taught you, slowly, to lean closer instead. The cedar chests of scenting gloves, the long rows of sun-steeped oil jars on the sill, the pale washing balls rolled smooth between two learning palms, the green riverbank mornings among the rushes, the resins burning low on their small heated dish, the great recipe book opening at last to your own small careful hand. And beneath all of it, unhurried and constant as the master's own voice, the quiet Countess in her dark green gown, weeping a little, briefly and without embarrassment, over a scent made for her and for no one else in the whole wide city. A whole year, you think, walking beside the master through the cold starlit streets, folded now into a single small room behind a single worn brass ring, and carried forward, a little further than it has yet travelled, in your own two hands. The stars overhead are very clear tonight, the way they often are on the coldest, clearest winter evenings, and somewhere far off across the sleeping city, a single late bell sounds, faint and unhurried, marking an hour neither of you troubles to count. And here gently is where we leave you, on that quiet street, with a whole year of scent and patience and careful hands folded away behind you, and a whole further stretch of years, unwritten still, waiting ahead. We have wandered a long way together tonight, through rose gardens at dawn and orange groves in bloom, through pomanders and gloves, and washing balls and sweet bags, through resins burning low on their little dish, and rare strange ingredients carried across whole oceans to reach a single small shelf, through a great recipe book, kept faithfully across generations, and through the quiet, private joy of a scent made for one person alone. If your eyes have grown heavy by now, here at the end of it, that is exactly as it should be. There is nothing more this evening asks of you. Let them close. The shop behind you is dark now, and locked and resting, the way you are resting, the way the whole quiet street around you is resting, and it will be there again tomorrow, exactly as you left it, the shelves in their place, the roses waiting their turn to bloom again, when the season comes round once more, the still cool and clean, and ready for whatever the next morning's gathering brings to it. Nothing here needs you before then. Nothing here will change while you sleep. The rushes on the front room floor will hold their quiet fragrance through the whole of the dark hours, undisturbed, and the small silver pomanders will hang exactly where they were left, patient as always, waiting for a morning that is not yet any of your concern. Sleep well. The apothecary will be back soon, with another quiet room to show you, another quiet century to wander through together. For now, only rest, only the last faint drift of rose and orange blossom and warm resin still settling somewhere at the edge of your thoughts. Only the slow, easy weight of a long day finally, gently letting go of you softly and completely and without any hurry at all. Good night.